The year was 1875. The sun was a smear of bruised copper, bleeding into the dust of the Texas borderlands. This was a place where the map bled too, where Texas ran into New Mexico without any real line. Just miles of cracked earth, sharp yucca, and grass that stretched into an ocean of pale gold. It was a hard land, a land of settlers and soldiers, of Comanche hunters and men who sold rifles to the highest bidder. The tension was a living thing, pulled taut as a bowstring. The railroad was coming, a snake of iron pushing west, and every spike driven into the dry soil felt like a nail in the coffin of the old world. Treaties were signed in bad faith and broken before the ink was dry. Eliza Carter did not ride like a lady. She rode like a person trying to outrun the devil, or perhaps just trying to outrun the hour when she would have to become a lady. At 18 years, she was more comfortable with the sweat plastering her cotton shirt to her back and the grit between her teeth than she was with the bone china teacups her mother had insisted on shipping from the East. Her mother was gone 5 years now, resting in the hard ground, but the teacups remained, a fragile tyranny in a house built of thick adobe and rough-hewn timber. She pulled her horse, a strong bay named Atlas, to a halt on the ridge. Below her, the Carter ranch spread out, a scar of civilization in the vast emptiness. The cattle were dots of red and black, moving slowly toward the thin ribbon of the creek. This land was brutal. It offered magnificent sunsets and then killed you with drought. It gave you horizons that promised freedom and then broke you with sandstorms that flayed the paint from the wagons. Eliza felt the conflict tighten her chest, a familiar ache. She loved this land. She loved the smell of the dust and the horse and the sharp scent of the sagebrush she was crushing beneath her boot. She knew how to set a rabbit snare and how to gauge the distance of a storm. She could load and fire the Winchester rifle in her saddle scabbard with reasonable accuracy, enough to scare off a coyote or perhaps a desperate man. But she was also Thomas Carter's daughter, the only daughter. And in this world, that meant she was an asset. She was a piece to be played in the slow, grinding game of survival and expansion. She was supposed to be civilized. She was supposed to marry well, meaning marry someone who could consolidate her father's land, someone who understood cattle prices and railroad futures. She was, in short, a girl who had to be married off to the right house. She reached into the pocket of her split skirt, her fingers brushing against the object she always carried. It was a small square of linen, edged with delicate white lace, her mother's handkerchief. It was absurdly clean, hopelessly out of place. It was the symbol of the woman she was supposed to be. She held it for a moment, the fragile fabric against her calloused palm, then shoved it back down. The sun was almost gone. It was time to go home, miles away, hidden by a fold in the mesas. Tahu of the Penateca Comanche watched the same sun die. He was perhaps 24 years old, though seasons meant more to him than years. He sat motionless on his pony, a man carved from the same red rock that surrounded him. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple breechcloth. Around his neck, a single eagle feather tied with a leather thong rested against his collarbone. It was his medicine, a reminder of the sky, the freedom that was rapidly shrinking. His eyes were fixed not on the sunset, but on the unnatural wound in the earth far to the south, the twin iron rails of the railroad, gleaming like snake scales in the last light. Tahu was a man of two worlds, and he belonged fully to neither. He had been raised in the traditions of his people, taught to ride before he could walk, to read the land as a white man reads a book. But he had also spent time at a mission school, part of a failed treaty, before he had walked away. He had learned the white man's tongue. He had learned to read their words and, more importantly, he had learned to read their intentions. He understood their hunger for land was not like the hunger for buffalo. It was a hunger that never ended. It would devour the sky if it could. He was a warrior. His body was hard, scarred from hunts and the few skirmishes he had seen. But he belonged to a band that had chosen the difficult path of peace. His chief was old, and he had seen too many warriors die, too many children starve. They were trying to negotiate, to hold on to a piece of this land that had been theirs since the first memory, even as other bands fought on. His heart was heavy. He knew the railroad meant the end. It meant more soldiers, more rifles, more fences. It meant the death of the great herds. He felt the familiar pull, the desire to fight, to join the warrior bands to the north who still painted their faces and struck at the settlements. But he also carried the words of his chief. "A man can die in a fire," the old man had said, his voice like dry leaves. "Or he can carry water. Both take courage. Only one builds a home." Tahu wanted to preserve his people, but he recognized that violence was no longer the only path. It might even be the path to extinction. When Eliza reached the stables, the air was cool, the scent of hay and horse manure sharp and comforting. She handed Atlas off to a ranch hand and walked toward the main house. The yellow light spilling from the windows looked warm, but she felt a chill. She paused at the wash basin on the porch, scrubbing the dust from her face and hands, trying to smooth her wind-tangled hair. She hated this part, the transformation. Inside, the main room was thick with cigar smoke and the low murmur of men's voices. Her father, Thomas Carter, stood by the massive stone fireplace. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, but the land and his grief had worn him down. His face was a map of worries, the deepest lines etched there the year his eldest son, Thomas Jr., had been killed in a Comanche raid. That was 10 years ago, but the loss still sat at the table with them every night. Thomas Carter was a man caught between his hatred for that loss and his crippling fear of more war. Her brother, Jacob, was slumped at the table, a bottle of whiskey near his hand. At 25, Jacob was everything Eliza was not. He was bitter, loud, and he nursed a hatred for all red men that was almost religious in its fervor. He was an extremist, ready to act on his darkest impulses. He looked up as she entered. His eyes narrowed. "Playing cowboy again, sister," he sneered. "You smell like a horse." Eliza ignored him, her gaze shifting to the third man in the room, Colonel Harlan Briggs. Briggs was the commander of the nearby cavalry post. He was a man who seemed entirely out of place in the West. His blue uniform was impeccably pressed, his boots polished to a mirror shine, his graying hair neatly trimmed. He rose as she entered, offering a small, polite bow that felt more like a threat than a courtesy. He was a partner to her father. But Eliza sensed the truth. Briggs wanted to erase the Comanche to clear the way for the railroad. And he would use anyone to do it. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth and cold, like stones pulled from a winter river. "Always a pleasure to see you brighten the room." Eliza nodded, forcing a smile that felt stiff on her face. "Colonel." "We were just discussing the railroad," Thomas Carter said, his voice heavy. He rubbed his face. "And the complications." "Complications," Jacob spat, his voice thick with contempt. "Call them what they are. Pa, savages. We got Briggs here. We got a dozen good rifles on this ranch. It is time we cleared them out. For good." Briggs held up a hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Patience. Mr. Carter, war is a messy business. Inefficient. What the railroad requires is stability. A permanent solution." Eliza watched the colonel. He spoke of eradicating people as if he were discussing the removal of pests from a granary. Jacob's hatred was hot and reckless, but the colonel's was cold, patient, and far more terrifying. This was the West, where the law was often just the man with the most guns, and conscience was a luxury few could afford. The newspapers in the East called the Comanche monsters, but Eliza knew life here was far more complicated than that. As the men talked, Eliza felt a sudden, sharp memory surface. She was 6 years old. She had wandered from a picnic, chasing a horned lizard, and gotten lost. The panic had been absolute, a screaming terror as the sun set and the coyotes began to yip. She had huddled behind a rock, crying, certain she would die. And then a figure appeared. Not a settler, a woman. Her face was brown and lined, her hair in 2 long braids. A Comanche woman. She had not spoken a word of English, but she had seen Eliza's terror. She had sat slowly and offered Eliza a piece of dried jerky. She had wrapped her in a thick blanket. She had stayed with her until the sun rose, and then she had pointed her back toward the ranch. Eliza had never forgotten that face, the kindness in hands that Jacob would have said were stained with blood. That woman had saved her, and now men like Briggs and her own brother wanted to wipe her people from the earth. Back at the Carter Ranch, the tension was so thick Eliza could barely breathe. She had been dismissed from the men's talk, sent to oversee the kitchen and prepare for supper. She was supposed to be practicing her stitches, but her hands were shaking too badly to thread the needle. She moved quietly down the hall, carrying a tray of fresh coffee she knew none of them needed. It was an excuse to be near the study. Her father's voice was low, agitated. Jacob's was silent, which probably meant he was drinking heavily. But it was Briggs's voice, calm and measured, that froze her. The study door was open with just a crack. She stood in the shadows of the hallway, her heart pounding a dull rhythm against her ribs. "Cannot guarantee the safety of your herds, Thomas," Briggs was saying. "Not with the Penateca band so close. They say they are peaceful, but they are still Comanche. They have not raided in 2 seasons, her father argued, his voice weak. Their chief, Iron Shield, he seems reasonable. Reasonable, Briggs scoffed. "A reasonable savage is still a savage. The railroad investors are nervous. They want the territory secured. My orders are to clear that valley. I can do it with bullets, or we can do it with diplomacy." There was a long silence. Eliza held her breath. "What kind of diplomacy?" her father asked. "The Comanche respect blood ties. They respect marriage alliances. It is an old custom, but it holds weight. They have a young warrior, Tahu. He is important. He speaks English. He is the one who holds the hotheads in check." Eliza felt a strange, cold sickness rising from her stomach. She did not understand. "What are you saying?" "Harlan," her father whispered. Briggs's voice dropped, but it was sharp, cutting through the thick air. "It is a simple arrangement, Thomas, a peace agreement, and to seal it, a marriage. It would stop the raids. Give us time to get the railroad through. It would be a symbol of cooperation." Another terrible pause. "You mean she is 18? She is of age." Eliza's blood ran cold. She pressed her ear closer, desperate, terrified. Then she heard her father's voice, broken, a whisper of defeat. "And what do we get?" Briggs' reply was crisp, the sound of a latch clicking shut. "If we marry her off to him, we can avoid the war, and we get to keep the cattle and the railroad line." Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She stumbled back, the coffee tray rattling. She did not understand all of it, not fully, but she understood the core of it, the cold, brutal transaction. She was the price. She was the diplomacy. She was being traded, like cattle, to save a railroad, and she was being traded to the very people her brother wanted to slaughter. The cold dread that had touched her on the ridge returned, but now it had a name. It was the sound of her father's voice, giving her away. She did not run. She did not drop the tray. Her blood had not run cold. It had frozen solid, a block of ice in her chest. She stood in the hallway for a full minute, the voices in the study fading back into a meaningless hum. The words, however, remained, sharp as glass. "If we marry her off to him, keep the cattle and the railroad line." She turned, with a stiffness in her joints that made her feel 100 years old, and walked back to the kitchen. She set the tray down on the rough wooden table. Her hands were perfectly steady. She looked at them, surprised. They seemed to be an animal's hands, disconnected from her mind. She waited. She did not know for how long. The moon rose, casting a pale, judgmental light through the kitchen window. The house fell quiet. Finally, she heard the heavy scrape of her father's chair, the low murmur of goodbyes, the jingle of spurs as Colonel Briggs left. She heard Jacob stumble up the stairs to his room. Then, the heavy tread of her father's boots approached the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway, a large silhouette against the lamplight of the hall. "Eliza!" His voice was rough with whiskey and something else. Guilt. She did not turn around. She just stared at the window, at the vast, dark land outside. "She is 18, she said, her voice a dead, flat whisper. "She is of age." Thomas Carter flinched as if she had struck him. He walked into the room, his boots loud on the stone floor. He lit the small lamp on the table, and the weak light illuminated his face. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot, the lines around his mouth carved deep. "You heard," he stated. It was not a question. "I heard you sell me," she said. She turned to face him, the block of ice in her chest finally beginning to crack, letting a hot, acidic anger rise into her throat. "I heard you trade your daughter for a railroad." "It is not like that," he said, his hands balling into fists on the table. "It is complicated. It is about peace. Eliza, it is to stop a war." "A war," she repeated, her voice rising. "A war that Briggs and Jacob are desperate to start. You are not stopping a war. You are paying them to pause it. And I am the payment. Eliza, listen to me." He sat down, heavily, the chair groaning beneath his weight. "You do not know what it is like. To lose a son, to see your men, your friends, butchered. To live every single day waiting for the smoke, for the screams. This Tahu, he is a warrior, yes, but he is from Iron Shield's band. They want peace, this marriage. It is the only way they can prove it, and the only way I can get Briggs to stand down. So I am to be a human treaty," she said, bitterness making her mouth twist. "A piece of paper, but one that bleeds." She had always imagined this moment. A nervous suitor, perhaps the young banker from town, or the son of that rancher over in the next county. A man who would be polite, who would bring her flowers, who would be white. She had not loved the idea, but she had accepted it as her fate. This was not fate. This was a sacrifice. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "This Tahu. What kind of man are you giving me to?" "He is a Comanche," her father said, as if that were the only answer. "He is said to be a man of his word. He is their chief's choice." "A savage," she whispered. The word tasted like ash. All the stories, the terrifying campfire tales of men who scalped their enemies and stole women, stories told by Jacob, stories printed in the Eastern papers. They all rushed into her head, the blood, the violence, the sheer otherness of it. But then, another image fought for space, a kind face, brown and lined, a piece of jerky offered by a steady hand, a woman who had sat with a lost little girl until dawn. She pushed the memory away. That was one woman, long ago. This was a warrior, a man. "You have already agreed," she said. "The meeting is in 2 days," he replied, unable to meet her eyes. "At the fort, to finalize the terms. You will meet him." She stared at her father, this man who had taught her to ride, who had held her when her mother died. She saw his fear. He was terrified of the Comanche, terrified of Briggs, terrified of losing what little he had left. And in his terror, he was willing to feed his daughter to the wolves to keep them from the door. The ice in her chest had melted, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I see," she said, and she turned, walked out of the kitchen, and went to her room, locking the door behind her. 2 days later, the sun beat down on the parade ground of the cavalry post. The place smelled of horse, brass polish, and hypocrisy. A large, open-sided tent had been erected to provide shade, a pitiful gesture against the crushing heat. On one side sat the white men Colonel Briggs, looking cool and composed. Her father, his face gray and sweating, and a few other prominent ranchers, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disgust. Eliza sat slightly behind her father, as instructed. She wore her best dress, a dark blue cotton that was already sticking to her back. She felt like a prized heifer being led to auction. Then they arrived. They did not ride in like a war party, whooping or shouting. They rode in with a slow, deliberate dignity. About a dozen men, their faces painted not for war, but for ceremony. They were led by an old man, his face a web of deep wrinkles, his hair gray. This must be Iron Shield, and beside him, riding a muscular paint pony, was the man she knew must be Tahu. He was nothing like the monsters from her nightmares. He was not a stooped, grunting brute. He was tall, even sitting on his horse. He was lean, with the long, powerful muscles of a rider. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple leather vest that left his chest and arms bare. His skin was the color of rich, oiled copper. His black hair hung in two thick braids. Around his neck, he wore the single eagle feather she had seen in her vision. He dismounted in one fluid motion. He did not look at her. He looked at her father, at Briggs, and then his eyes scanned the perimeter, counting the soldiers on the walls. He was calm, but it was the calmness of a panther, an assessment of threat. His eyes, when they briefly passed over her, were sharp and intelligent, and, she thought, filled with a profound, weary sadness. Tahu tasted the dust and the lie in the air. He stood beside his chief, his hands loose at his sides. He had argued against this. He had argued that this was a trap, a white man's trick. They do not offer peace, he had said to Iron Shield the night before. In their own tongue, they offer a chain. They want to tie us to them, and then they will pull the chain tight. They will pull the chain whether we are tied or not, the old chief had replied. They have the thunder sticks. They have the iron horse. We cannot fight the storm. Tahu, we can only try to build a shelter. And this shelter is a woman, the daughter of the man who fences the water. This shelter is time. Iron Shield had corrected him, his voice firm. You will marry this girl. You will bring her to our camp. You will show her our ways. You will give her a child. And this bond, this blood, will hold the soldiers back. It will give us one more season. Maybe two. It is a heavy burden, but you are strong enough to carry it. Tahu had looked at the old man, his heart torn. He was a warrior. He had earned his place. He desired a wife. Yes, but one of his own people. A woman who understood their world, who could share his life. Not this pale sacrifice. He knew what the white men thought of them. He knew their contempt, and he knew this girl, raised in that world, would bring that contempt with her. She would be a symbol of their invaders, living in his own lodge. Now, he saw her. She was small, seated behind her father. She was staring at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with what he easily recognized as fear. He felt a flicker of something. Pity. Maybe, or perhaps just recognition. She was a pawn, just as he was. Her father, the rancher with the hard eyes, was sacrificing her. His chief was sacrificing him. All for a peace that Tahu did not believe would last. The talking began. A translator, a nervous half-blood man from the fort, turned the stilted, formal words back and forth. Briggs spoke first. We are here to ensure peace. The railroad brings prosperity for all. We must have assurances that your young men will not disrupt the work, Iron Shield replied, his voice slow. We do not disrupt. We hunt on our land. Your fences cut the land. Your railroad scares the buffalo. We ask only to be left alone. A commendable wish, Briggs said with his cold smile. But the world is changing. To show our commitment to this new, shared future, we have agreed to an alliance, a bond, a marriage. A low murmur ran through the ranchers. Marry Carter's girl to a redskin, one of them whispered, loud enough to be heard. It is a disgrace, from the back of the Comanche group, one of the younger warriors. Red Fox spat on the ground. Our finest warrior. Tahu heard him mutter in their language, shackled to a milk-faced woman. This is not an honor. Only the old men, on both sides, seemed to understand. Thomas Carter, who had lost a son, Iron Shield, who had lost dozens. They were the ones who knew the price of a failed talk, and it was paid in bodies. Jacob Carter had not been invited to the formal talk. He stood just outside the tent, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. He had stormed at his father for 2 days. You are a coward, he yelled, his spittle flying. You are giving her to them, giving her to the filth that killed Thomas Jr. She is a traitor to her race if she goes. A traitor to her own blood. And now, watching the scene, he saw Briggs, standing beside his father, that same faint smile on his lips. Jacob did not trust the colonel, but he trusted the colonel's desire to kill. He had heard Briggs talking to his men. "This marriage is a temporary solution," Briggs had said quietly. "It holds them in place, and when the treaty is inevitably broken, and it will be, we will have the perfect justification to act. We will be seen as the wronged party. We will wipe the slate clean." Jacob smiled, a broken, ugly expression. He would let this farce play out. For now. After the endless, empty words were spoken, her father motioned for Eliza to stand. Her legs felt like wood. "This is my daughter, Eliza," Thomas Carter said, his voice thick. Iron Shield nodded slowly. He spoke, and the translator hurried to keep up. "And this is Tahu, my son's son, a leader among our warriors. He will be her husband. He will keep her safe." Tahu stepped forward. The translator motioned for Eliza to step forward. They stood in the middle of the tent, the two groups watching them like hawks. She was close enough now to see the intricate beadwork on his vest, to smell the scent of wood smoke and sage that clung to him. "The two should speak," the translator said nervously. Eliza looked up at him. He was taller than she had realized. His face was stoic, his eyes unreadable. She would not cry. She would not collapse. She lifted her chin. "I am Eliza Carter," she said, her voice small but clear. Tahu looked at her. He saw the pride, the rigid set of her shoulders, the terror she was trying so hard to hide. He gave a slight nod. He spoke in English, his voice low and guttural, but the words perfect. "I am Tahu." He did not smile. He did not threaten. He did not offer comfort. He simply stated his name, and in that moment, she understood. He did not want this any more than she did. He was not a monster capturing a prize. He was a man being handed a burden. They were two sides of the same counterfeit coin, their lives spent by other men in a game they did not control. That night, Eliza did not sleep. She sat at her window, staring at the empty prairie. She was a hostage, a tribute, a lamb being led to slaughter. The fears came back, thick and choking. But then she thought of her father's face, the raw fear in his eyes. He was a weak man in many ways, but he was not evil. He was just broken, beaten down by the land, by grief, by men like Briggs. She thought of Jacob, his face twisted with a hatred that was eating him alive. She thought of Tahu. "I am Tahu." Just that, a simple statement. He had not looked at her with contempt. He had not leered at her. He had looked at her like an equal in this horrible, impossible bargain. She was 18 years old. Her life was supposed to be her own. It was not, but the way she lived it, that was... If they were going to trade her, she would not go as a weeping victim. If she was to be a bridge, she would be a bridge made of stone, not of straw. She would walk into this with her head held high. She would go, not because her father commanded it, or because Briggs arranged it, but because she chose it. It was a small, desperate piece of control, but it was hers. She would go, and she would use this position to try and protect both sides, to stop the war that men like Jacob and Briggs so desperately wanted. Tahu, too, sat by his fire long after the others slept. His decision was simpler, bound by a code she could not yet understand. The chief had commanded. He would obey. But his mind was on the girl, her pale face, the tremor in her hands that she tried to hide. She was not a warrior. She was soft, from a soft world. She would not survive a week in the camp. He touched the eagle feather at his throat. He had been given a duty. His duty was to the people. This girl was now, by the chief's decree, part of the people. She was his responsibility. If he must take this wife, he would do it, and he would protect her. He would protect her from the harshness of the land, from the suspicion of his own people, and, if necessary, from the cruelty of hers. According to Comanche law, his wife was his household. She was under his protection. She was not a prize of war. She was not a slave. She was to be respected. It was not love. It was not even a partnership. It was a beginning. born not of affection, but of two separate, private decisions to choose courage. The chapel at the cavalry post was not a house of God. It was a box of raw lumber that smelled of pine sap and fear. It was hastily assembled, much like the peace treaty it was meant to serve. Eliza stood rigid in a white dress. It was her mother's, altered badly by the post seamstress. The fabric felt stiff, like a shroud, the intricate lace on the collar scratching her neck. Her face was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped a small, dry bouquet of prairie flowers. Her father stood beside her, his Sunday suit looking too tight, his face slick with sweat. Colonel Briggs watched from the front pew, his expression one of polite, satisfied impatience, as if he were observing a livestock transaction. A few ranchers and their wives were scattered behind him, their gazes a mixture of pity and sharp disapproval. The post chaplain read the words quickly, his voice droning. Eager to have the service finished, Tahu stood opposite her. They had forced him into a black suit that looked foreign and wrong on him, pulling tight across his shoulders and chest. He was rigid, his eyes fixed on a crack in the wooden wall just past her head, his face a mask of stone. He looked trapped. He looked like a caged hawk. The I-do's were whispers, words stolen from their throats by the heavy, oppressive silence. It was over in less than 10 minutes. She was, by the white man's law, Mrs. Tahu. The name felt like a brand on her tongue. As the sun fell, the second ceremony began. This one was not in a box. It was under the vast, open sky, which was turning a deep, bruised purple. The Comanche camp was alive with the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. A large fire burned in the center, sending sparks up to challenge the first stars. The air throbbed with the sound of a single, deep drum, a heartbeat that seemed to shake the ground itself. Tahu was different here. He had shed the suffocating suit. He wore his buckskin leggings and a breastplate of polished bone. He looked like a part of the earth, not a visitor. He and Eliza were brought before Iron Shield. The old chief spoke, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the drum. He spoke of earth and sky, of duty, of the joining of two bloods to make the people stronger, to mend the broken hoop of the world. Tahu was given a small necklace. It was not gold or silver. It was a simple leather thong, strung with carved bone beads and two small, bright blue feathers. He stepped toward her. Eliza flinched, her heart hammering against her ribs, her whole body tensing for a blow that did not come. He paused, his eyes reading her terror. Then, slowly, carefully, as if handling a spooked foal, he lifted the thong and placed it over her head. His fingers brushed the skin of her neck, just below her ear. The touch was light, almost accidental, but it burned like a brand. She looked around the circle of firelight, and the full weight of her isolation crashed down on her. She was utterly alone. The white faces were gone, save for her father, who stood awkwardly at the absolute edge of the firelight, looking like a man who had wandered into the wrong world. Jacob was not there. He had refused to come, calling it a pagan circus. His face twisted with disgust. The faces of the Comanche watched her. The warriors were impassive, their eyes hard, judging. Some of the younger women whispered behind their hands, their expressions mirroring the scorn she had seen from the white women at the fort. They saw her as a white intrusion, a symbol of their enemy, a pale weakness, but some of the older women, their faces lined like dried riverbeds, looked at her with something else. It was not kindness, exactly. It was a deep, knowing pity. They saw her for what she was, a sacrifice, a child, dressed as a woman, sent to do a man's job. Tahu, too, was isolated, standing beside her but not with her. He was performing a duty. He was a man accepting a sentence. Eliza felt tears stinging her eyes and willed them back. She would not cry here. She would not show weakness. She lifted her chin, staring into the flames. As the drumbeat softened and people began to eat, a woman moved from the shadows near the chief's lodge. She was older, perhaps her father's age, with a face that was severe but held a deep intelligence in her dark, piercing eyes. She stopped in front of Eliza and simply looked at her, her head tilted, studying her as if she were a difficult puzzle. The woman's eyes scanned Eliza's face, lingering. Then, her expression shifted. It was a flicker of something. Recognition. The woman spoke, her voice low. "To Iron Shield." She pointed, first at Eliza, then at her own eyes. Eliza stared back. And suddenly, the campfire, the drum, the smell of smoke, all of it faded. The woman's face superimposed itself over a memory. 12 years old and sharp as glass. A lost little girl. A horned lizard. A cold night. A piece of dried jerky offered by a steady, brown hand. A thick buffalo robe. Eliza's own hand unconsciously went to the new necklace at her throat. She whispered one word. So quiet it was barely louder than the crackle of the fire. "You—" The woman's eyes widened. She nodded slowly. Her name was Uma. She turned back to the chief, speaking quickly now, her hands moving in sharp, expressive gestures. The translator, a nervous half-blood man who had been hovering nearby, looked startled. Uma spoke again, this time looking directly at Eliza, and the translator hurried to relay the words. "She says she remembers you," the translator said, his voice full of disbelief. "She says she found you when you were a child, lost on the prairie. She says you were not like the others. You were afraid, but you did not scream at her. You did not hate her. You shared her blanket." Uma looked at Tahu, then back at Eliza. The translator continued, his voice dropping. "She says this marriage was her idea. She told the chief that if any white girl could be a bridge, it was the girl who was not taught to hate. She told him. She had hope for you." Eliza's knees felt weak. She had been wrong. She was not just a piece of property traded by her father and Briggs. She was not just a victim. She was a choice. Someone, on this side, had looked at her and seen hope. It did not make her less terrified, but it made her feel less hollow. The night ended. The fire burned down to embers. Uma gave her a small, supportive nod before melting back into the shadows. Then, 2 older women took Eliza's arms, their grip firm but not unkind. They led her away from the main camp, Tahu walking silently behind them. They climbed a small path up to a lodge set on a slight rise, overlooking the vast, moonlit prairie. It was separate from the other dwellings. It felt exposed and terribly, terribly quiet. The women gestured for her to enter. She stepped inside. Tahu followed. The flap of the teepee, made of thick buffalo hide, was dropped closed. The sound was soft, but it felt as final as a prison gate slamming shut. A small fire burned in the center, casting restless shadows on the hide walls. A thick pile of buffalo robes was laid out on one side. This was it. This was the moment she had been dreading since her father's confession. She was 18 years old. She had never been kissed. She knew nothing of what happened between a man and a woman. Only the hushed, fearful whispers of other girls and the crude jokes of the ranch hands. She was a virgin, and she was terrified. She backed away from him, stumbling until her back hit the curved, sloping wall of the teepee. She could not stop the shaking. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. She sank to her knees on a smaller rug, pulling her arms around herself, the white fabric of her mother's dress pooling around her. And despite her vow, the tears came. Not loud sobs, but silent, hot tears that streamed down her face, dripping onto the delicate lace. She cried for her lost girlhood, for her mother, for the life she would never have. She cried because she was alone with a man the world called a savage, and she was his property. Tahu stood by the entrance, watching her. He did not move for a long time. The firelight played over the hard planes of his face, the strong line of his jaw. He was a man, young, powerful, and this was his wedding night. Tradition, and the white man's law, gave him every right to take what was his. He could see the terror in her, the way she trembled, a small, broken white thing in his lodge. He was torn. He felt the pull of physical desire, a young man's immediate hunger. He felt the pressure of his people's expectations. A marriage must be sealed. But he also saw the child who had been saved by Uma, He saw the girl who had stood with her chin up at the fort, trying to be brave. Finally, he moved. Not toward her, but to the other side of the small fire. He sat down on his heels, putting the flames between them. He was several feet away. He waited until her sobs quieted to ragged, hitching breaths. Then he spoke, his English careful and slow, his voice low. "I will not touch you." Eliza froze, her head snapping up. She stared at him, confused, her face stained with tears, her eyes wide. "You do not want this," he continued, his voice quiet. "You were given. I was commanded. This is not a marriage of choice." He looked at the fire, not at her. "Among my people, a man does not force his wife. He protects her. He provides for her. He honors her. That is what a husband is." He gestured to the pile of robes. "It is not by force." The relief was so sudden, so profound, that it broke something else inside her. A new wave of tears came, but this time it was not from fear. It was from a strange, aching gratitude that hurt her chest. "I thought," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken, "I thought I was just flesh, something you bought, something to be used and thrown away." He looked at her then, and his eyes were dark with a conflict she could not name. "I am a man," he said, his voice quiet. "I will not lie. I desire you, but I will not be the animal your people think I am." He paused, his gaze steady. "You are in my lodge. You are my wife. You are safe, even from me." He did not move from his spot. He stayed there, across the fire, a silent guardian. The hours passed. The fire burned low. The lodge grew cold. Eliza shivered, still huddled on her rug, exhausted but too afraid to move. Tahu saw it. He stood, and she flinched, pulling the edges of her dress tighter. He only grabbed a heavy, untanned buffalo robe from a pile. He did not throw it. He walked over, his steps silent. He knelt, and gently, his skin never touching hers, he draped the heavy, warm robe over her shoulders. He hesitated, then sat down again, not across the fire, but closer, near her, but not touching her. He just sat, his back against a support pole, his arms crossed, watching the dying embers. Eliza, wrapped in the warmth of the robe, her body aching with exhaustion, eventually slumped over, her head on her knees. She fell into a fitful, broken sleep. When she woke, the world was gray. A faint, cold light was filtering through the smoke hole at the top of the teepee. Her neck was stiff, her body aching. She looked up. Tahu was in the same position, his eyes open. He had not slept. He had stayed awake all night, watching over her, keeping the cold from her. He had demanded nothing. He had taken nothing. He had simply protected her. He saw her stirring. He rose, stretching the stiffness from his powerful frame. He moved to the tippy flap and pulled it open. The clean, sharp light of sunrise flooded the small space, chasing away the shadows. He looked out at the prairie, at the sky turning from violet to rose. Then he looked back at her, at the girl still wrapped in the heavy robe, her hair a wild tangle, her face swollen from crying. "The night is over," he said. And then he said the words that would change everything. "Among my people, a choice is made once, a vow. But I see now that is not enough for this." He met her gaze, his own clear in the new light. "I will choose you every sunrise. Eliza, not just tonight." She stared at him. He was not talking about tradition or duty. He was making her a promise of choice. In that moment, surrounded by strange smells, in a lodge that was not her home, married to a man she did not know, Eliza Carter felt something she had not felt in her entire life. Not with her father, not with her brother, not with any man. She felt safe, truly safe. It was not love, not yet. It was a single, fragile seed, planted in the darkest, most terrifying night of her life, now visible in the first light of dawn. The wedding had begun in the suffocating darkness of her father's fear, and it was ending in the clean, open air of a new morning. She had been passed from one man to another, not as a slave, but as a partner, The aftermath was quiet but immediate. The women who came to bring food that morning saw the bride, her eyes red from crying, and the groom, his face set from a night without sleep. They saw the untouched wedding robes. The news spread through the camp like wildfire. The younger warriors, like Red Fox, sneered. The white man's woman had turned their warrior soft. He did not even take her. It was a weakness. Back at the fort, the soldiers who heard the rumors laughed. The great savage warrior was afraid of a little white girl. But Uma, when she heard, did not laugh. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. She had been right. This man, Tahu, was not like the others. He did not build his house on a foundation of violence. He had chosen a different kind of strength. Life in the teepee was a series of small, humbling shocks. The white dress was taken from her, not unkindly, by Uma. It was replaced with a simple, sleeveless buckskin dress. Soft as butter but smelling of smoke and tannins, it was infinitely more practical, but wearing it felt like shedding her old skin. The camp was a place of constant, shared labor. There was no privacy. Women worked in groups, their hands always busy. Eliza, who had run a ranch house, thought she understood work. She did not. She learned to scrape hides, a nauseating, back-breaking task that left her hands raw and her stomach churning. She learned to forage for roots, digging in the hard, dry earth for hours for a small handful of bitter plants. She learned to pound dried buffalo meat and choke cherries into pemmican, her arms aching until she thought they would fall off. At first, she was a clumsy disaster. The women watched her, a few of the younger ones openly tittering when she fumbled a tool or gagged at the smell of boiling tripe. She was the white wife, a delicate ornament who did not belong, but she did not complain. She did not weep. She just set her jaw, wiped the sweat and grease from her face, and tried again. She learned to accept the dirt under her fingernails, the constant ache in her back, the sting of the sun on her skin. Uma was her guide, a stern but patient teacher. She would rap Eliza's knuckles with a stick when she held a scraper wrong, but she would also share her water skin, a silent gesture of solidarity. Gradually, the camp's perception of her began to shift. This was not the pampered, fragile doll they had expected. She was strong. She endured. She was trying. The cultural clashes were inevitable. Some were small, almost comical. The food was a constant trial. One evening, she was offered a piece of roasted meat she could not identify. She ate it, swallowing hard against the strong, gamey flavor, only to be told by a smiling Uma that it was roasted prairie dog. Eliza managed to keep it down, just barely. She made mistakes with the language. She was trying to learn the Comanche words, her tongue tripping over the guttural sounds. One morning, she tried to greet Iron Shield, but she mixed two words. Instead of "Good morning, respected chief," she had apparently said, "Your foot is a large cloud." The old man had stared at her, then let out a dry, barking laugh, a sound that astonished everyone. Even Tahu, standing nearby, had pressed his lips together, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a way that was almost a smile. But some clashes were serious. One afternoon, she returned to their lodge. It was her duty to keep it clean. Tahu's war shield and a long, feathered lance rested against the wall. They were in her way as she tried to sweep. Without thinking, she reached out and moved them, placing them neatly outside the door. Tahu returned an hour later. He saw the shield, and his face, which had been softening toward her over the weeks, turned to stone. He did not yell. His voice was a low, cold hiss that was far more frightening. "You do not touch these. I was cleaning," she stammered, shrinking back. "This is not a broom," he said, his voice shaking with a contained fury. He picked up the shield. "This is my medicine. It is my life. You have no right." He spoke in Comanche, the words too fast for her to follow, but the anger was universal. He was truly, deeply angry. Uma had to be called. She explained her grave. Eliza had violated a profound taboo. A woman was not to touch a man's weapons of war, his medicine bundle, To do so was to risk his spiritual protection, to invite disaster. Eliza was horrified. She had not just been rude, she had committed a sacrilege. She had to apologize, not just to Tahu, but in front of Iron Shield. She stood before the chief, her head bowed, and spoke the words Uma had taught her, words of respect and deep apology. Tahu stood beside her, his face rigid. It was a humiliating, terrifying lesson. She was not in her world. The rules here were different, and they were written in blood and belief. After that day, their fragile truce was fractured. Tahu was distant, sleeping on his own side of the teepee, his back to her. He barely spoke to her for 3 days. The bridge that brought them back together was horses. The Comanche were the finest riders in the world, and horses were their language. Eliza, who had grown up on horseback, was no slouch. One afternoon, she saw some of the younger men racing on the flats below the camp. She felt a familiar itch, a longing for the wind in her hair. She walked to where the ponies were kept. Tahu's paint was there, a magnificent animal, but she would not dare touch him. She found the mare she had been allowed to ride, a small, scrubby Mustang. Tahu was there, rebraiding his own pony's tail. He watched her, his expression still cool. She mounted the mare, her buckskin dress hiking up her legs. She nudged the horse into a walk, then a trot, then a full, desperate gallop, riding out onto the prairie, away from the smoke, the judgment, the alien rules. She rode until her lungs burned, letting the speed wash away her shame and her loneliness. When she finally pulled the mare to a halt, she was not alone. Tahu was beside her on his paint, having matched her stride for stride, his face unreadable in the wind. He said nothing, just looked at her. She had ridden well. He knew it. She knew it. "You ride like one of us," he said. The first words he had spoken to her in days that were not a command. "I ride like me," she replied, breathless, a flicker of respect. He nodded. "Come, I will show you something." They rode for an hour, deeper into the canyons. He taught her how to read the land. He showed her a broken twig, the faint scuff of a deer hoof. He pointed to the sky, showing her how the line of the hawks told of a thermal, which meant a change in the weather. This was his world. It was a book he could read fluently. As they sat on a ledge, resting the horses, she found herself talking. She told him about her ranch, about her mother. She told him about the books she had read, the ones her mother had brought from the East. She told him a story about a king who had 3 daughters. He listened. He was fascinated by this world of words, of stories that were not about the coyote or the eagle, but about men who lived in stone castles and fought for abstract ideas like honor and legacy. "Your world is full of walls," he said, "and yours is full of sky," she replied. They rode back in the late afternoon. The silence between them was different now. It was not cold. It was companionable. That evening, in the lodge, he began to talk to her again. He taught her the words for horse, sky, and river. Their intimacy grew in these small, quiet moments. It was not the intimacy of a husband and wife. Not yet. It was the intimacy of 2 people stranded on a small island. He taught her to fletch an arrow. She mended a tear in his vest, her stitching fine and even, a skill he respected. One evening, after a long, exhausting day, she fell asleep sitting up by the fire, her head nodding. She awoke with a start hours later to find herself covered by a robe, his robe. He was asleep on his own side of the fire. He had covered her. It was enough. But as Eliza's life settled into this new, strange rhythm, her mind was in turmoil. Where did she belong? She would smell the distant scent of her father's cattle, and a wave of homesickness would wash over her so powerful it made her dizzy. She missed bread. She missed the feel of a real bed. She missed her father, despite his betrayal. But then she would remember. She would remember Jacob's face, twisted with hate, screaming about filth. She would remember Colonel Briggs's cold, polite voice, clear the valley. She looked at the Comanche children playing by the creek, at Uma grinding corn. Briggs had been talking about them. He had been talking about slaughtering them. and a cold, hard truth settled in her. She was safer here, in a smoky hide lodge with a man she barely knew, than she had been in her own home, which was built on a foundation of such violent, cold hatred. She was beginning to feel more Comanche than white. Tahu, too, was struggling. He was a candidate to be the next chief. He had to be a leader. He had to be a model of Comanche strength. But the other young warriors, especially the arrogant Red Fox, watched him. They saw him riding with his white wife. They heard him speaking English to her. "He is soft," Red Fox muttered one night, just loud enough for Tahu to hear. "The white woman has taken his teeth." Tahu had grabbed Red Fox by the front of his vest, his eyes blazing, and thrown him to the ground. "My strength is my own," he had snarled. In Comanche, do not test it. But the words stung, because they touched a raw nerve. He was changing. His respect for Eliza was growing. He admired her courage, her refusal to break. He found himself wanting to protect her, not just as a duty, but as a deep, personal need. He began to have dreams he had never had before, dreams of a different future, a future where a child with his eyes and her hair could live without being hunted. It was a dangerous, soft dream for a man meant to be a war chief. Meanwhile, the peace was already beginning to tear at the seams. Colonel Briggs sat in his office, smoking a cigar. A scout, a greasy man named Slocum, stood before him. "It is done, Colonel," Slocum said. "We ran off about 20 head from the Miller Ranch. Shot 2. Left plenty of tracks. Just like you said. Looks just like a Comanche raid. A sloppy one." "Excellent," Briggs said, blowing a cloud of smoke. "And the evidence?" "Left a broken arrow by the fence line. One of those Penteca arrows. Easy to find." "Good," Briggs said, handing the man a few coins. "The railroad investors will be hearing about this. They will demand more protection. They will demand action." The news of the raid reached the Carter Ranch. Jacob, already drunk by noon, was incandescent with rage. "See, Pa!" he roared, slamming his fist on the table. "See, you gave them your daughter, and they spit in your face. They are raiding again. They will never stop." Thomas Carter looked pale, his hands shaking. "The treaty! The treaty is trash!" Jacob shouted. "Briggs is useless. I'm handling this." He stormed out. Grabbing his rifle, he found 3 other ranch hands, men as angry and drunk as he was. "We are going hunting," Jacob said, his eyes wild. They did not dare attack the main camp, but they knew of a small hunting party that was camped by the river. 2 lodges, mostly women and an old man. Curing hides, they descended on the camp at dusk, firing their rifles into the air. They set the lodges on fire, shot 2 of the prized hunting ponies, and scattered the curing hides. They rode off laughing, firing into the sky, feeling brave, in their drunken haste, as he leapt back on his horse. Jacob dropped his branding iron, the one he used for stray calves, the familiar C-bar. The next morning, Tahu was part of the group that found the smoldering wreckage. The women were terrified, but unharmed. The old man was furious. They had lost the ponies and the meat. It was a disaster. Red Fox was the one who found the branding iron in the mud by the riverbank. He picked it up. He held it aloft. The C-bar, the Carter brand, was unmistakable. A cold, deadly silence fell over the warriors. Tahu took the iron, his hand tight on the metal. It was still warm. That evening, the council met in Iron Shield's lodge. It was full of angry voices. Red Fox threw the iron on the ground in front of the chief. "There," he shouted. "The proof! The white rancher plays us for fools. He gives us his daughter as a spy, and then his men come in the night to burn us. The marriage is a lie. A trick." Iron Shield looked at the brand. He looked at Tahu, his face grim. "Your wife, her people, it may be her brother," Tahu said, his voice low. "He is a man of hate. Her father is weak," Red Fox interrupted. "It is the same thing. She is Carter's blood. She is in our camp. She knows our numbers. She knows where we hunt. She is a spy." The suspicion was thick as smoke. Tahu left the lodge, the iron heavy in his hand, his heart a cold knot. Eliza was in their lodge, mending one of her dresses. She looked up as he entered, a small, hopeful smile on her face. Their life had been quiet, almost peaceful, for a few days. Her smile died when she saw his face. He did not speak. He just walked to the fire and tossed the branding iron at her feet. It landed with a heavy, metallic clang. "What?" she began. "This," he said, his voice flat and dead. "It was found this morning, at our hunting camp, the one your brother and his men burned last night." Eliza stared at the C-bar, her blood turning to ice. Her father's brand. Jacob. "Oh, God, Jacob. He did not," she stammered. "My father would not. Jacob, he is your blood," Tahu said, his voice cutting into her. He looked at her, and the warmth she had begun to see in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by the cold, hard gaze of a warrior looking at his enemy. "They are saying you are a spy," he said. "They are saying you knew, that this marriage was a white man's trick." "No," she whispered, shaking her head, tears welling. "No, Tahu, I did not know. I swear, this is Jacob. It must be. It is not my father. It is not me." "It is your people," he said. He turned his back on her. "You are Carter's daughter, and your people have come to burn us." Eliza felt the trap snap shut. She was Carter's daughter. She was Tahu's wife. She was caught between two worlds, and both of them now believed she was a traitor. The women outside the lodge were already whispering. The children who had started to wave to her were now gone, pulled inside. She was alone again, more alone than she had ever been. She looked at the branding iron. She looked at Tahu's rigid back. She could not stay here and let them think she was a spy. She could not let Jacob's blind hate start a war that would kill them all. She had to know the truth, and there was only one place to get it. She waited until the camp was dark, until Tahu had left for the council lodge again. Her hands shaking, she pulled on her old riding skirt, which she had hidden away. She grabbed a small bag of pemmican, with her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break her ribs. She slipped out of the lodge and ran, a shadow among shadows, toward the ponies. She had to get to her father's ranch. She had to find out who was lying and who was trying to kill them all. She did not take the time to saddle the mare. She knotted the hackamore rope, grabbed a handful of mane, and swung herself onto the pony's bare back, her old riding skirt, stiff and foreign after weeks in buckskin, bunched around her thighs. She urged the pony out of the small corral, keeping to the shadows, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every sound was a threat. The yip of a coyote, the rustle of a bush, the click of a stone under the pony's hoof. She expected a shout, the thud of an arrow, Tahu's hand on her shoulder, dragging her back as a traitor. But nothing came. Only the cold, indifferent moonlight washing the prairie in silver and black. She rode for her old home, but she was not riding home. She was an outcast from both worlds, a ghost riding between two fires, belonging to neither. She rode with the cold, heavy weight of the branding iron in her mind. Jacob, his stupid, blind, drunken hate was about to start a war. He had put the brand on all of them, on her father. It took her most of the night, pushing the pony harder than she should have. She skirted the main paths, cutting through arroyos and over low mesas, the land she knew as a girl now feeling like enemy territory. She arrived at the Carter ranch well after midnight, the house a dark lump against the stars. Only one light burning in her father's study. She tethered the mare in a stand of cottonwoods, well away from the barn, and approached the house on foot, moving like a thief. She did not go to the door. She went to the study window, which was cracked open to the cool night air. The smell of cigar smoke and whiskey drifted out. She heard Jacob's voice first, slurred and loud, full of a terrible, bragging pride. "Told you Pa was soft," he was saying. "I had to handle it myself. Taught those red devils a lesson. Burned their little camp, shot a few of their ponies, but they did not like that." Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth, her stomach clenching. Colonel Briggs' voice, cold and sober, cut through the whiskey haze. "You are a fool, boy. That was a sloppy, reckless move. You were lucky." "Lucky," Jacob laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "I left them a souvenir, dropped the brand right by the river, let them know exactly who it was." "Which is precisely the problem," Briggs said, his voice tight with irritation. "Your action was unsanctioned. It complicates the narrative. I had everything in hand. The raid on the Miller Ranch was clean. Textbook. It looked just like a Comanche strike. It gave me the ammunition I needed for my reports. It proved the treaty was a failure before it even began." Eliza's blood ran cold. The Miller raid, Briggs had staged it. "Your little bonfire," Briggs continued, "was personal, but perhaps it can be salvaged. 2 acts of aggression. The ranchers are terrified. My superiors are now concerned. They are listening. They see the Penateca are unruly, that the peace is a sham, even with the marriage. So let us ride," Jacob shouted. "Let us finish it." "Patience," Briggs snapped. "You do not finish an infestation by swatting one fly. You wait. You let the poison work. And then you burn the nest. I need one more incident. Something undeniable. Something that proves they are a clear and present threat to the railroad, to the entire territory. Then I will have my orders. Then I will have all the troops I need to pacify this valley. Permanently." Eliza had heard enough. She was shaking, not with fear, but with a white-hot rage. She turned from the window, stalked to the front door, and threw it open. The 3 men jerked around, stunned. Jacob's jaw dropped, his drunken eyes wide. Briggs's face went smooth and hard. Her father, who had been sitting in the shadows, looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Eliza!" Thomas Carter gasped, rising from his chair. "You!" she said, her voice low and shaking, ignoring her father, pointing a trembling finger at Briggs. "The Miller raid. That was you. You hired men to attack your own people. To blame Tahu?" Briggs raised an eyebrow, his calm infuriating. "Miss Carter, you are hysterical. You should not be here. You belong with your husband. And you," she spat, turning on Jacob. "You burned their camp. You animal. You drunken, hateful animal. You are trying to get us all killed, just to prove you are a man. You traitor," Jacob stammered, his hand moving toward the pistol on his belt. "You whore. You come back here, smelling like their smoke, and you defend them." "I am defending the truth," she screamed. "I am defending our lives. Do you not see what he is doing? He is using you. He is using all of us." She finally turned to her father, who stood frozen, his face a mask of pale, sweating terror. "And you," she whispered, her rage collapsing into a terrible, aching disappointment. You knew he was dirty. You knew Jacob was out of control, and you did nothing. You sat here, hiding behind your whiskey and your fear, while they planned a massacre." "Eliza, it is complicated," Thomas Carter pleaded, his hands outstretched. "No, it is simple," she cried. "It is greed, and it is hate, and it is cowardice, and I will not be a part of it." She looked at her father, her eyes filled with a new, hard light. "You have to choose, right now. You stand with him." She nodded at Briggs. "And his war, or you stand with me. You stand with the peace you sold me to protect. You cannot have both." Before her father could answer, a new sound entered the room. A low, rising moan, like a train approaching from far away. It was not a train. The glasses on the table began to rattle. Briggs was the first to recognize it. He crossed to the window, his face grim. "Dear God in heaven," he said. A wall of blackness was rolling across the prairie, blotting out the stars. The wind hit the house like a physical blow, shaking the thick adobe walls. The front door slammed shut with a crack like a rifle shot. "Sandstorm," her father whispered, his face losing its last vestige of color. For 3 days, the world ended, the sun vanished, the sky was not blue or gray, but a thick, choking, reddish brown. The wind howled, a constant, maddening scream that never stopped. "Fine," Gritty dust seeped through every crack, covering the floors, the food, the water. It was impossible to see more than a few feet. It was impossible to breathe without covering your face. They were trapped in the house together. Eliza, her father, a terrified Jacob, and a calm, calculating Colonel Briggs. The tension in the house was as thick and suffocating as the air outside. They could not leave. They could barely speak. The storm had put their human conflict on pause, dwarfed by a power that could kill them all. In the Comanche camp, it was worse. The tip is strained against the wind, some tearing loose, the vital pony herd, their wealth and their life, scattered in a blind panic. The people huddled under stiff buffalo robes, praying to the spirits of the wind to pass them by, their eyes and lungs burning. Tahu, his heart a cold knot of fury and fear, had realized Eliza was gone hours after she left. He had seen the missing pony. Traitor. The word had burned in his gut. Spy. He had grabbed his bow and his pony and gone after her, tracking her easily. He was a shadow behind her, his rage battling his deep, buried worry. He had seen her sneak into the ranch house. He had been crouched in the barn, waiting, his mind torn. When the storm hit, he, too, was trapped. When the wind finally died, on the morning of the fourth day, the world was remade. The land was scoured. The contours of the hills softened. The landscape alien. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue. The human world returned with a vengeance. News came from a cavalry patrol. A vital supply wagon, headed for the fort and the small settlement, had been attacked. The wagon was burned. The guards killed. The food and ammunition stolen. The tracks, the patrol said, were clear. Despite the storm, moccasin prints, pony tracks. The work of Comanche, Briggs' face, when he heard the news, was a mask of grim satisfaction. This, he said, is the final straw. They are starving, desperate, and now they are murderers and thieves. The treaty is dead. Eliza knew it was a lie. The Comanche had been trapped, just as she was. They could not have organized a raid. She fled the suffocating house, running to the barn, desperate for air, for a horse, for a way to stop this. She threw open the barn door. Tahu was standing there, his face covered in dust, his eyes red-rimmed and burning. She stopped, her heart leaping into her throat. You followed me?" "You are my wife," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You are my responsibility. Even when you run—" "Tahu, I am not a spy," she said, the words tumbling out. "I came here to stop Jacob. I heard Briggs, the Miller raid. It was him. He staged it. And this wagon, it is him. I know it." Tahu looked at her, his gaze intense. He had been trapped in the barn for 3 days, listening to the wind, thinking. His anger had cooled, leaving only a cold dread. He had seen the cavalry patrol. He had heard the news. He knew his people were being framed. "The tracks," he said simply. "They say it was us." "They are lying," she said. "We have to prove it. Together." He looked at her for a long moment. She had run from him, but she had run for him. For his people. He nodded. "Once." "We prove it." They rode to the wagon site. It was a ruin of charred wood and bodies. Tahu dismounted, kneeling by the scuffed earth. "They are right," he said. "Moccasin prints." He looked closer. "But they are wrong. These are old moccasins, worn by a white man. The heel strikes too hard." Eliza, meanwhile, was looking at the ground near a rock. "Tahu, look," she pointed, a small, brass casing, glinting in the sun. "This is from a cavalry rifle. Springfield, not a Winchester, not an old trade musket." They followed the tracks. Tahu reading the faint signs, Eliza adding her own knowledge. They found the trail of heavy-shod horses, not unshod ponies, hidden under the lighter pony tracks. The trail led away from the camp, toward the broken canyons. They found them in a box canyon, gathered around a small fire, dividing the stolen flour and ammunition. 6 of them. One was Slocum, Briggs's scout. The others were rough men, wearing pieces of old uniforms, faces hard and mean. Deserters. "Briggs pays well," Slocum was saying, laughing as he hefted a sack of flour. Tahu knocked an arrow. Now, he whispered. He lost the arrow. It struck one of the men in the chest. The man coughed, looked down, and fell forward into the fire. Chaos. The men scrambled for their rifles, firing wildly. Tahu and Eliza were pinned behind a ridge of rock, bullets chipping stone near their heads. Tahu was fast, moving between 2 points of cover, loosing arrows with deadly, silent accuracy. Eliza drew her Winchester, her hands steady. This was not like shooting rabbits. This was for her life. For his life. She aimed, took a breath, and fired. One of the men yelled, clutching his arm. Tahu took down another. Only Slocum and one other were left, firing from behind the burned-out wagon. Tahu rose to move to a new position, but the last man, hiding behind a wheel, saw him. He raised his rifle, taking careful aim at Tahu's exposed back. "Tahu!" Eliza screamed. There was no time to think. She swung her rifle, aimed, and fired. The shot was true. The man jerked, his rifle discharging into the sky, and collapsed. Slocum, seeing he was alone, scrambled onto a horse and fled, riding low and fast. Silence, the smell of gunpowder and blood. Tahu slowly stood, his bow in his hand. He looked at the man Eliza had shot. He looked at her. She was pale, shaking, her rifle smoking. He had a long graze on his left arm, bleeding freely. "You are hurt," she said, her voice trembling. He would have killed me," Tahu said, his voice quiet, awed. You fought. For me." "We fought," she said, her legs suddenly weak. They found shelter for the night in a shallow cave as darkness fell, too exhausted to ride on. The desert night was cold. Eliza tore a long strip from her petticoat, her hands finally steady, and cleaned his wound. She wrapped his arm tightly, her touch gentle. He watched her, his face close to hers in the dark. The suspicion was gone, burned away by the firefight. He saw her, not as a white woman, not as a symbol, but as Eliza, brave, strong, his partner. He reached up with his good hand and touched her face, his thumb brushing the gunpowder smudge from her cheek. "You saved my life. You saved mine," she whispered, leaning into his touch. The warmth of his hand was the only warmth in the world. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not the chaste, protective promise of their wedding night. This was a kiss of equals, a kiss of survivors. It was raw and desperate, and full of a love that had been forged in dust and gunfire. It was a choice, made by both of them. In the darkness, they clung to each other, a single, living warmth against the vast, cold emptiness of the night. They did not go further. The bond was too new, too sacred, and the danger too great. They huddled together for warmth, sharing a blanket. And in that shared silence, Eliza felt a new, terrifying secret take root. She counted the days, the sickness in the camp, the strange weariness. And now, she was late, weeks late, since those first nights after the sunrise promise, when he had come to her, not with demand, but with a quiet, shared trust. Their bodies had learned what their minds were just accepting. She was almost certain. She was carrying his child, a child of two worlds, conceived in a fragile peace, and now poised to be born into a war. She held the secret to herself, a cold stone of terror and wonder in her belly. When they returned to the Carter Ranch at dawn, they found her father in a state of panic. A cavalry messenger had arrived. Briggs, using the final unprovoked attack on the supply wagon, had sent his official report. He had his authorization. He was to disarm and contain the Pennateca band, effective immediately. The attack was scheduled in 2 days. Eliza and Tahu looked at each other in horror. They had the truth, but Briggs had an army. It was not a skirmish. It was a massacre, waiting to happen. They rode back to the Comanche camp with a desperate, unified purpose. The news of the impending attack, combined with their proof of Briggs's treachery, set the camp ablaze with panic and fury. That night, the Warriors' Council was not a debate. It was an explosion. They gathered in Iron Shield's large lodge, the air thick with smoke and rage, The drum silent. "We run," one of the older warriors argued, his voice strained. "We take the women and children and go deep into the staked plains. Let the soldiers chase us into the land of thirst. We can survive. They cannot." Red Fox leaped to his feet, his eyes wild. "Run again. We have run until our lands are the size of a white man's garden. No, we fight Briggs wants a war. We give him one. We attack the fort tonight. We burn them in their beds before they can ride out." A roar of approval went up from the younger warriors. They were ready to die, as long as they took their enemies with them. Tahu stood silent, his face grim, the white bandage on his arm a stark contrast to his dark skin. He was caught in the middle. Iron Shield, his face carved with a terrible grief, looked at him. "The young men want war. The old men want to run. You, Tahu, you are my son's son. You are our future. What do you see?" Tahu's conflict was absolute. He was a warrior. His blood sang for the fight, to strike back at the men who had framed him, who had burned their camp, who now planned to massacre them. Red Fox was right. A preemptive strike was a sound military tactic. It was the warrior's way. But he looked at the entrance of the lodge, where Uma stood, her face a mask of dread. He thought of the children, sleeping, unaware. He thought of the old. An attack on the fort would be a suicide mission. They might kill some, but the full weight of the United States Army would come down on them. It would be the end of their people. He began, his voice rough. "I do not see a path to victory, only to death, fighting them, running from them. Both are an ending. So we do nothing," Red Fox sneered. "We wait for the sabers in the morning. We let the white man's daughter, your wife, watch as we are slaughtered." Before Tahu could answer, the lodge flap was pushed aside. Eliza entered. A collective gasp, then a wave of angry hisses. This was a war council. No women were allowed, least of all this woman. "Get her out," Red Fox shouted, moving toward her. Tahu was at her side in an instant, his good arm pushing Red Fox back, his eyes blazing with a cold fire that stopped the warrior in his tracks. "She will speak," Tahu commanded, his voice filling the lodge. Eliza's heart was hammering, but she stood tall, her gaze sweeping over the angry faces. She looked at Iron Shield. "You want a third path," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I have one, but it is not a warrior's path. It is a fool's path, and it may be the only one we have." She laid it out. "You cannot fight them. You cannot run forever. The only thing we have is the truth. Briggs has broken the white man's law, not just yours. He has staged raids, killed soldiers, to start this war. He is a murderer." "His people will not believe us," an old warrior said. "They believe him." "Not all of them," Eliza said. "The settlement, the town, they are not all soldiers. There is a federal judge there. There is a pastor, a man named Davies, who speaks of God's law. There are men who want to do business, not make war. Briggs is afraid of them. He is afraid of the telegraph, of his superiors in the East finding out the truth. He needs this to be a just war." She took a breath. "My plan is this. We do not run, and we do not fight. Not yet. Tahu and we will ride to the settlement tonight. We will bring our proof, the shell casing, the story of Slocum. We will go to the judge, to the pastor. We will use their own laws against them. We will expose Briggs before he can attack." The silence was absolute. It was the most insane idea they had ever heard. "They will kill you before you speak 10 words, Iron Shield said, his voice flat. "They will kill him," Red Fox corrected, pointing at Tahu. "She is one of them. They will welcome her back. This is her trick. She leads our best warrior into a trap." "If it is a trap," Eliza said, meeting Red Fox's glare, "then I will be the one who springs it. I am the peace bride. I am the symbol of this treaty. My presence will be a shock. My word, the word of Thomas Carter's daughter, will carry weight. They will have to listen." Tahu watched her, his heart swelling with a terrible, proud love. She was magnificent, standing in the center of his people's anger, armed with nothing but words and the truth, but he saw the flaw. He saw his own impossible choice. If he stayed, he would lead the attack on the fort, as his chief was about to command. It would be his honor and his death. He would be abandoning her. If he went with her, he would be walking into a nest of soldiers and men who wanted him dead. He would be seen by his own people, by Red Fox, as a coward, hiding behind his white wife's skirt, abandoning his tribe in their darkest hour. He had to choose his honor as a warrior, or his new, fragile future with her. The council broke apart, the warriors still arguing, their faces dark. Iron Shield gave Tahu until the false dawn. Choose your path, Tahu, the warriors, or hers. But by sunrise, we will act. Eliza and Tahu walked back to their lodge. The camp was awake, the air thick with the terror of a coming dawn. Women were packing, their faces weeping. Children were crying. It was the sound of a world ending. Inside their lodge, the small fire was the only point of light. They stood facing each other, the weight of 1,000 lives on their shoulders. You cannot go, Tahu said, his voice a low command. It is too dangerous. They will kill me, and they will hurt you. They will call you a traitor. I cannot let you do this. You cannot let me, she said, her voice rising, not in anger, but in a desperate plea. Tahu, do you not see there is no letting up? This is the only thing I can do. This is the only reason I am here. It is why this marriage happened. I am the only one who can walk into that town. She gripped his arm, his good arm. I am not asking you to choose me over your people, she said, her eyes boring into his, tears streaming down her face now. I am asking you to choose the path that saves your people, the one that saves the most lives. Your life. My life. She stopped, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. He prompted, his gaze softening. Our future, she finished, unable to say the word. Tahu, I do not want you to act because I am your wife, or because I am a white woman. I want you to choose this because it is the only way that does not end with all of us dead in a ditch. He looked at her, at this woman who had been a terrified, weeping girl in this very lodge, this woman who had learned his ways, who had fought beside him, who had saved his life, and who was now offering to walk into the fire for his people. When you first came, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he had never been taught to name. You were a duty, a burden given to me by my chief, a symbol of what we had lost. He reached up and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle on her tear-wet cheek. You are not a duty anymore. Eliza, you are my heart. I do not love you because it is my honor. I love you because you are my honor, my home. She collapsed against him, burying her face in his chest, her sobs shaking her. Then we are home together, she whispered. No matter where we live, no matter which world. You and I, we are the place we belong. He held her, his strong arms wrapped around her, and in that moment, he made his choice. It was not the warrior's way. It was a new way. It was their way. They held each other for a long time, the sounds of the dying camp fading. The air was thick with the unsaid, with the fear of the morning. He kissed her, a deep, slow kiss that was not about passion, but about sealing a vow. It was a promise of return, a desperate prayer against the dawn. They lay down on the robes, not for sleep, but for solace. It was a night stripped bare of fear. Only a deep, profound, and aching love remained. They held each other, their bodies speaking a language of trust and desperation. They whispered the things they had never said, their fears for the future, their regrets for the past. It was a joining of souls, a desperate human moment of finding life in the very shadow of death, before the world outside came to tear them apart. Just before the sky began to turn gray, the lodge flap opened. It was Uma. Her face was etched with worry, but her eyes were clear. She sat, holding a small bundle. You have chosen, she said. It was a statement. Tahu nodded. We ride for the town. We will find the judge. Uma looked at Eliza, a deep, sad wisdom in her gaze. When I found you, all those summers ago, you were a small, crying thing, like a lost bird. You saved me, Eliza said. Uma, you are the reason I am here. I saved you, Uma said, her voice dropping. On the same day my own son died. He was 6 years old. Your age, Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What? A white trader's wagon, Uma said, her voice flat, devoid of old emotion. My son was curious. He picked up a tool that had fallen. The trader thought he was stealing. He shot him. She paused. I carried his body for a mile. Then I sat by the creek. And I was dead. My heart was stone. I wanted to kill every white person on this earth. She looked at Eliza. And then I heard another child crying. It was you, lost, afraid. And I looked at you, and you were just a child. You were not the man who shot my son. You were just afraid. And I thought, if I let my hate rule me, I'm no better than him. If I pass this hate to another, the circle will never end. She pressed the small bundle into Eliza's hands. I did not save you to watch you die in a war. Eliza, I saved you to stop one. My son is gone, but you can save the sons and daughters who are here now. My choice was to end the hate in my own heart. Your choice. It is to end it in the world. Eliza clutched the bundle. It was food and a small, sharp knife. I will not fail you. Uma? You must not fail him, Uma said, nodding at Tahu, as if summoned by the words. A new sound came from outside, a panicked shout, a horse whinnying, a ranch hand. One of her fathers was riding hard into the camp, waving his hands, yelling, Eliza, Miss Eliza, for God's sake! Tahu and Eliza ran from the lodge. The man, a cowboy named Pete, half fell from his horse, his eyes wild with terror. It is Jacob, he panted. Your brother. He is crazy. He is telling everyone that you and the Comanche are planning to ride to the fort for a trick parlay, and he says if that warrior of yours, Tahu, if he shows his face, he is going to shoot him. He is going to shoot him dead and say the Comanche fired first. Eliza's blood ran cold. Jacob. He was not just a hater. He was a murderer. He was planning to assassinate Tahu, to use his death as the spark for the massacre. She looked at Tahu. His face was a mask of cold, deadly understanding. Their plan. Jacob had just turned it into an execution. This was her final choice. Her brother's blood, or her husband's life. Get the horses, she said to Tahu, her voice a low, steel wire. She turned to Pete. Ride back, find my father. Tell him to choose. Tell him his son is about to murder his daughter's husband in cold blood. And tell him to meet me at the settlement. With every man he has who still has a soul. She ran back to the lodge, grabbing her Winchester. Tahu was waiting, his paint pony and her mare ready. He had his bow and a quiver full of arrows. He looked at her, his eyes asking the final question. He is my brother, she said, her voice breaking. And he is a monster. I will not let him hurt you. Tahu nodded. His choice was made. He would not be seen as a coward. He would be seen as a man protecting his wife, protecting the truth. He swung onto his pony. We ride, Tahu said. He turned to Iron Shield, who had come to watch, his face a grim stone in the pre-dawn light. I go with her. This is our path. Iron Shield looked at his warrior, at the white woman beside him, at the hopeless dawn. If you fail, the old chief said, his voice a death rattle. If the sun sets on your failure, we will ride, and the very rocks of this land will weep with blood. Tahu and Eliza looked at each other one last time, a silent vow passing between them. Then they dug their heels in and rode. Two small figures against the coming light, racing the sun, racing the cavalry, and racing a bullet with Tahu's name on it. They did not ride as warriors. They rode as ghosts. Tahu and Uma were wrapped in dark blankets, their faces partially covered, looking like any of the displaced natives who lingered on the edges of the settlement. Eliza wore her oldest ranch clothes, her hair tucked under her father's battered hat, her face smudged with dirt. She looked like a weary farm girl, not the peace bride who had vanished. They rode wide around the cavalry patrols, using the canyons and dry riverbeds Tahu knew so well, pushing their horses through the last of the darkness. They reached the settlement just as the sky was turning a sick, pale gray. The town was not asleep. It was buzzing like a disturbed hive. Lights burned in every window. The saloons were full, but there was no laughter, just the low, angry hum of voices. Troopers from the cavalry post were everywhere, their blue uniforms a stark warning. They were checking wagons, questioning anyone on the street. "They are preparing for war," Tahu murmured, his voice low, his hand never leaving the hilt of the knife tucked in his belt. His bow and quiver were hidden beneath his blanket. "We find the pastor first," Eliza said, her voice tight. "His church is on the edge of town. He will be ringing the morning bell." They split up, agreeing to meet by the church. Eliza walked her horse down the main street, her head down, every nerve screaming. She saw the fear in the faces of the townspeople. They were locking their doors, boarding their windows. They had been fed Briggs's lies, and they were terrified of the Comanche uprising. They looked at her, a lone girl, with pity. One man calling out, "Get inside! Missy, the savages are coming!" She found the small, wooden church. Pastor Davies, a thin man with a gaunt face and kind, troubled eyes, was just stepping outside, a rope in his hand to pull the bell. "Pastor," Eliza said, stepping from the shadows. He jumped, his hand going to his chest. "Miss Carter, Eliza, good Lord. Child, we thought. They said you were taken, that you were dead." "I was not taken," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I am married. Pastor, I do not have time. A massacre is about to happen, and it is based on a lie." He looked at her wild hair, her dirty face, her Comanche moccasins. He saw Tahu and Uma step out from the alley, and his face hardened with fear. "Miss Carter, what is this? That is Tahu, the warrior." "He is my husband," she said, "and he is the one being framed. Colonel Briggs is the one who has been attacking the settlers. He staged the raid on the Miller Ranch. He staged the attack on the supply wagon. We have proof." "Colonel Briggs," Davies said, his mind reeling. "That is a terrible accusation. He is an officer of the army." "He is a murderer," Eliza said flatly. "And he is about to slaughter an entire camp of innocent people in your God's name. I need you to listen, and I need you to bring Judge Miller." They gathered in the cold, dim vestry of the church. The judge, a portly, cautious man named Miller, had been roused from his bed. He looked angry and skeptical. Eliza laid it out for them, her words fast and precise. She told them about the conversation she had overheard between Briggs and Jacob. She told them about the staged raid, the deserters, the fight in the canyon. Tahu, standing in the corner like a coiled snake, produced the Springfield shell casing. "This is from a soldier's rifle," Tahu said, his English clear. "Found at the wagon, the men we fought, they were white. They worked for Briggs." The judge looked at the casing, then at Eliza. "Miss Carter, this is an extraordinary story. It is your word, and his, against a decorated colonel. You say you were with him fighting these men." His eyes were full of suspicion. He saw a girl who had gone native, a girl whose loyalties were corrupted. "It is the truth," Eliza said. "He is protecting you." "Protecting us," the judge scoffed. "From whom?" Uma stepped forward. She had been silent, a shadow by the door. She looked at the judge, at the pastor, and her eyes were filled with a grief so old it was terrifying. She began to speak, her voice low, in broken English, but with a power that filled the small room. She told them about her son. She told them about the traitor's bullet. She told them about finding Eliza, a lost child, on the same day. "I had hate," Uma said, her hand clutching the small cross the pastor wore. "Enough hate to burn this town, but I see just a child, crying. I choose no more hate." She looked at them, her eyes burning. "My son is dust. Many sons are dust, because of hate. Now, more come. Your colonel, he is a man of great hate. He will make more dust of my people. And then, my people, they will make dust of you. It will not end until someone, like you, chooses to stop it." The room was silent. Pastor Davies wiped a tear from his eye. Judge Miller looked down at his hands. Uma's story had done what Eliza's proof could not. It had made the Comanche human. What would you have us do?" the judge whispered. "Come with us," Eliza said. "Come to the fort. Be our witnesses. We will confront Briggs in front of his own men, in front of the town. We will speak the truth. He will have to answer to you." The walk to the fort was the longest of Eliza's life. The sun was rising, casting a bloody light on the eastern hills. The townspeople were gathering, drawn by the strange procession. The pastor, the judge, Eliza Carter, and 2 Comanche, walking straight toward the cavalry post. The gates were open. Soldiers were preparing to ride, checking saddles, loading rifles. The bugler was warming his lips. They were minutes from departure. "Halt!" a sentry shouted, leveling his rifle. "That's the savage! Tahu, he is here. Sound the alarm." "We are here to see Colonel Briggs," Judge Miller shouted, his voice quavering but holding authority. "On official town business, stand down. Soldier." The soldier, confused, looked from the judge to Eliza, to the armed Comanche, and back. He called for his superior. In moments, they were in the courtyard, surrounded. Briggs emerged from his office, his face a mask of cold fury. He saw Eliza, Tahu, and Uma. Then he saw the judge and the pastor. His eyes narrowed. This was not part of the plan. "Judge," Briggs said, his voice clipped. "This is a restricted military area. I'm about to engage the enemy. What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Colonel," Eliza said, stepping forward, "is that you are a liar." A gasp went up from the soldiers. "I have proof," Eliza continued, her voice ringing in the tense yard. "Proof that you staged the raid on the Miller Ranch. Proof that you hired deserters to attack the supply wagon. Killing your own men. Slocum works for you." Briggs laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound. "This is absurd. This is the desperate fantasy of a girl who has been corrupted. She is a puppet for these savages. She is a traitor to her own people." "She is my daughter!" The voice was a roar. Thomas Carter, his face gray and streaked with sweat, pushed through the crowd of soldiers. He was followed by a dozen of his own men, all armed, their faces grim. Pete had delivered the message. "She is my daughter," Carter said again, his voice shaking but loud. "And she is telling the truth. I have stood by. Colonel, I have let go of my fear of you, and my own grief. Make me a coward. No more." "Arrest this man," Briggs shouted at his soldiers, pointing at Tahu. "And this woman. They are spies. They have infiltrated the fort to attack us." "You cannot," Judge Miller said, stepping forward, his face pale but resolute. "As the highest legal authority in this territory, I'm telling you to stand down. These are serious accusations. Our abbreviations," a new voice slurred. Jacob Carter stumbled into the yard, a bottle in his hand, his face flushed, his eyes wild. He had his pistol drawn. "Listen to him, Colonel," Jacob laughed, waving his gun. "Listen to a redskin whore, my sister, she is nothing." He looked at the crowd of soldiers, his face swelling with a drunken, twisted pride. "You want to know the truth. You soldiers want to know this piece. It is a joke." "Jacob, shut your mouth," Thomas Carter pleaded. "No, I will not," Jacob yelled. "You are all soft, the Colonel. He talks. But I taught him. I taught those red devils. I burned their hunting camp. I shot their ponies. I faked the tracks. I left him my brand. I showed him what the Carter family does to filth." A dead, profound silence fell over the courtyard. The soldiers looked at each other, their faces filled with dawning horror. The judge and the pastor looked at Briggs. They had their confession. Briggs saw it. He saw his command, his reputation, his entire plan, evaporating in the morning sun. He had lost, his face contorted, Not with fear, but with pure, undiluted rage. "You," he snarled, his hand flashing to the holster at his side. "You have all been corrupted." He drew his pistol, not at Jacob, not at the judge, but at Tahu. "The savage is the source." He raised the gun to fire. "No!" Eliza screamed. The world exploded into chaos. Briggs fired. At the same moment, Tahu threw himself at Eliza, pushing her to the ground. The bullet hissed past her ear. Soldiers, loyal to Briggs, raised their rifles. Carter's men, loyal to him, raised theirs. A few soldiers, looking at the judge, hesitated, lowering their own weapons. The yard became a swirling mass of brawling men. Tahu was on his feet in an instant, pulling Eliza up. He had lost his bow. He drew his knife. Eliza pulled the small pistol she had taken from her father's desk. They were back to back, a small island in chaos. "Do not kill," Eliza yelled. "Shoot to warn, aim for legs." Tahu did not have that luxury. A soldier charged him, bayonet fixed. Tahu moved like a dancer, deflecting the blade, his knife flashing, sinking into the man's shoulder. The soldier screamed and fell back. Another came at him. Tahu disarmed him, smashing his elbow into the man's face. Eliza saw a trooper leveling his rifle at the unarmed Pastor Davies. She fired her pistol into the air. "Stop! He is a man of God!" The soldier, shocked, looked at her. In that moment of distraction, another soldier, one of Briggs's loyalists, saw her. He saw the Comanche whore with a gun. He raised his own pistol and aimed it straight at her heart. "Traitor!" he screamed. Tahu saw it. He did not have time to think. He threw himself in front of her. The sound of the shot was deafening. Tahu grunted, a terrible, wet sound, and his body slammed into hers. He staggered, his hand clutching his side, his eyes wide with shock. Blood! So much blood was already pouring through his fingers. "Tahu!" she screamed, her voice breaking, catching him as he fell to his knees. Briggs saw his moment. Tahu was wounded, defenseless. He turned his face to a mask of triumph and raised his pistol again, aiming it at Tahu's head. "The end of the line! Savage!" "No!" a voice roared. It was Jacob. He had been watching, his drunken haze momentarily pierced by the sight of Tahu, a man he hated, diving in front of his sister. Jacob, in one last, blurred, instinctive motion, lunged. He did not lunge at Briggs. He lunged at the gun. He grabbed the colonel's arm, shoving it upward. Just as Briggs pulled the trigger, the gun fired. The bullet, meant for Tahu, struck Jacob high in the chest. Jacob looked down, a strange, confused expression on his face. He looked at his father. "Pa," he whispered. He collapsed. Thomas Carter screamed, a sound of inhuman anguish, and ran to his son, falling to his knees in the dust. Briggs stood, stunned, his gun empty. Before he could move, Tahu, in a final burst of strength, threw his knife. It spun end over end, striking Briggs in the wrist. The gun clattered to the ground. At the same instant, Judge Miller's voice boomed. "It is over as a federal judge. I order you to seize this man, seize Colonel Briggs. He's under arrest for murder and treason." The loyal soldiers, the ones who had hesitated, finally had their orders. They swarmed Briggs, who stood shaking with rage, clutching his bleeding wrist. The fighting stopped. The yard was filled with the sounds of groaning men, and two screams, Eliza's, as she tried to stop the bleeding from Tahu's side, and Thomas Carter's, as he held his dying son. Eliza looked up from her husband's pale, sweating face, her hands covered in his blood. She saw her father, rocking Jacob in his arms, tears streaming down his face, washing paths through the dust and grime. The war, for a moment, had ended, but the cost was unthinkable. Tahu was dying, and Jacob was already dead. "He is dying!" Eliza screamed, her hands slick with his blood, trying to press the edges of the wound together. "Help me, somebody! Help me!" The courtyard was a frozen tableau of shock. Briggs was in chains, his face a mask of silent, murderous fury. Thomas Carter was still on his knees, His body slumped over the lifeless form of his son, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The soldiers and ranchers stood apart, staring at the blood in the dust. Their anger evaporated, leaving only a sick, hollow shame. Uma was the first to move. She ran to Tahu, her face grim. She pushed Eliza's shaking hands away and pressed her own, firm and steady, against the wound. "It is deep," she said, her voice low. "On his side. He is bleeding inside. We must move him." "Where?" Eliza cried, looking around the hostile fort. "Where can we go?" "My office," a voice said. It was the doctor, a small, fussy man named Elias Gable, who also served as the town's undertaker. He was pale, his hands trembling. We must take him to my office." "No," Thomas Carter said, his voice a dead rasp. He looked up from his son's body, his eyes vacant. Not there. The inn. Get him a room at the inn. The best room." He was a broken man. But in his brokenness, a strange clarity was emerging. He owed this man, his daughter's life, his own. They made a makeshift stretcher from a cavalry blanket and 2 rifles. Tahu was unconscious, his face a pale, grayish copper beneath the dust, his breathing shallow. Eliza walked beside him, her hand gripping his, her knuckles white. Uma walked on his other side, her hand still pressed hard against his wound. They carried him out of the fort. A strange, solemn procession. The townspeople, who had been hiding behind their boarded windows, emerged, their faces pale with fear and curiosity. They saw the savage, Tahu bleeding, carried by white soldiers. They saw Eliza Carter, his wife, her dress stained with his blood, her face a mask of terror. They saw Thomas Carter, the rancher, walking like a dead man, his men carrying the shrouded body of his son, Jacob. They reached the inn. The innkeeper, a large woman with a hard face, tried to block the door. "I am not having him in here. He will bleed on the sheets." Thomas Carter looked at her, his eyes dead. "He is my guest. He is my son-in-law. He will have the best room, or I will burn this place to the ground." He reached into his pocket and threw a handful of gold coins on the floor. "This pays for the sheets." They laid Tahu on a soft bed, the first he had ever been in. The clean white sheets were instantly stained a dark, spreading crimson. "Get out," Dr. Gable said, shooing them all away. "All of you. I need space, and hot water, and bandages. Lots of them." Eliza refused to leave. "I am staying. I am his wife." The doctor looked at her, then at Uma, then at the bleeding man on the bed. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Very well. You, and you," he pointed at Uma, "can stay. You seem to have a strong stomach. The rest of you, out." Thomas Carter, his men carrying Jacob's body, went downstairs to wait. The inn saloon, which had been a hotbed of war talk an hour before, was now silent as a tomb. For hours, the doctor worked. He was not a surgeon. He was used to pulling teeth and setting simple fractures. He probed the wound, his hands shaking. "The bullet. It is deep," he muttered. I think it missed the kidneys, but it tore something. He is bleeding internally. I cannot get it. I do not have the tools." "Then stop the bleeding you can see," Uma said, her voice sharp. She was tearing linen sheets into strips, her movements economical and precise. The doctor, sweating, took the needle and thread he used for stitches. He did his best, his hands fumbling, to close the worst of the wound. He packed it, bandaged it, and then there was nothing to do. "He is in God's hands now," the doctor said, "washing his own, which were stained dark. He has lost a terrible amount of blood, and the fever will come." He looked at Eliza. "Do not expect much, child. I am sorry." He left. Eliza and Uma were alone with Tahu. He was frighteningly still. His skin was cold, clammy. His breathing was a faint, shallow whisper. Eliza sat by the bed. She did not cry. She was beyond tears. She was a hollow, empty thing, holding onto his hand, which was limp and cold in hers. She had brought him here. She had begged him to come. She had led him into Jacob's bullet. She faced the truth of it, the black, gaping maw of her future. She was a widow, and she pressed her other hand to her belly. She was carrying a child who would never know its father, a child who was half white, half Comanche, and would be hated by both. A child who would be born an orphan, in a land that had no place for him. "He will be cold," Uma said, her voice pulling Eliza from the dark. "We must keep him warm." They covered him with every blanket in the room. They sat, one on each side of the bed. A silent, desperate vigil. Uma began to hum, a low, monotonous Comanche chant, a prayer to the spirits of the earth to hold on to a fading life. Hours passed. The sun set. Tahu's breathing grew rougher. The fever came, just as the doctor had predicted. He began to twist on the bed, his body burning, his mind lost. He spoke, not in English, but in the fast, guttural tongue of his people. He was calling out, for his horse, for his chief, for the wind. Eliza bathed his face with a cool cloth, whispering to him, her voice cracking. "I am here, Tahu, I am here. Do not go, please. Do not leave me. I am here. I am your home." Once, in the deepest part of the night, his eyes flickered open. They were cloudy with fever, but for a second, they seemed to clear. He focused on her face. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Yes," she sobbed, the tears finally coming. "Yes, I am here. I am cold," he whispered. "We are keeping you warm," she said, clutching his hand. "You are safe. You are here." He looked at her, his gaze holding a terrible, sad clarity. He knew he was dying. "I am sorry," he breathed. "For our child," she gasped. You knew." "I see you," he whispered. "You, hand, there, I see." His eyes began to lose focus. "Do not go," she cried, desperate, clinging to him. "Tahu, please, I am so afraid. I am afraid for him to be alone. I am afraid for him to grow up without you. Please, please do not leave us." His eyes closed, his hand went limp, his breathing, it seemed to stop. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Uma grabbed his other wrist, her fingers pressing hard. She held them there for a long, agonizing moment. Then, "His heart," she breathed. "It is still there, faint, but it is there. He is a fighter. He is on the border, between this world and the next. We can only wait." While Eliza and Uma fought for one life in that small, dark room, another battle was being waged downstairs. The saloon had become an impromptu council chamber. Iron Shield, hearing of the battle at the fort, had ridden in, not with warriors, but with his council, under a flag of truce. He now sat at a table, his face a mask of stone, across from Thomas Carter, Judge Miller, and Pastor Davies. The ranchers and townspeople who had been so ready for war now stood at the edges of the room, their faces pale and ashamed, silent witnesses. "Your colonel is in chains," Judge Miller began, his voice heavy. "He will be sent east to face a military tribunal for treason and murder." "And the boy?" Iron Shield asked, his voice low. "My son is dead," Thomas Carter said, his voice broken. He was filled with a poison. I hate that I let it grow. He died. He died saving my warrior," Iron Shield said, his voice flat. "A strange end. A snake that bit its own tail." "The point now, gentlemen," the judge said, "is what comes next. The treaty is broken. The trust is gone. But the railroad is still coming. The settlers are still here, and your people, they are still here. What do we do now?" For a long time, no one spoke. The air was thick with grief and mistrust. "My people want justice," Iron Shield said. "They have lost ponies. They have lost meat. They have been branded as liars. And my warrior, Tahu, he lies upstairs, dying. There is no justice that can bring back the dead, Pastor Davies said softly. Only, perhaps, a future for the living. What future? A rancher in the back shouted. We cannot live beside them. Look what happened, bloodshed. So, the bloodshed, Judge Miller's voice boomed, was caused by us, by our greed, by our lies. Let us be clear on that. Then Thomas Carter spoke, his voice a raw whisper, but it carried in the silent room. I had 2 sons. My eldest, Thomas Jr., was killed by a Comanche raid many summers ago, and that seed of hate, it grew in my heart. It grew in Jacob. I let it, I fed it, I hated your people, he said, looking at Iron Shield. And today, that same hate, it killed my second son. It poisoned him until he was a monster. And it almost killed my daughter, and the man she loves. He stood up, his body trembling, a man hollowed out by grief. I am done with hate. It has taken everything from me. Everything. Except Eliza. I ask, as a father who has lost one child to hate, and another to madness, let us stop. Let us find a way to let the children live. Into that heavy silence, Uma, who had come down to get fresh water, spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. I, too, lost a son, she said, and she told her story again, of the traitor, of the bullet, of finding Eliza. I chose no more hate. I chose that child. She looked at Carter. You choose now. You choose hate for your dead son, or you choose life for your daughter and for her child. The room was still. The news of Eliza's possible pregnancy, spoken so plainly, hung in the air. A child, a mixed blood child, the symbol of all their fears. A child, Iron Shield murmured, his eyes looking into the distance. Tahu's child. That child, Judge Miller said, will belong to both worlds and will be welcome in neither, unless we make a place for him. And so, the new treaty was born. Not in a military tent, with uniforms and rifles, but in a dusty saloon, in the shadow of death, by men who were broken and grieving. They talked all night, they argued, they wept, but they found a way. The Penateca Comanche would keep a portion of their land, guaranteed by federal law, witnessed by the judge. The Carter Ranch and the other ranches would have their boundaries. And in the middle, the strip of land that had been the source of all the conflict. It would be held in trust. It would be a neutral territory, a place for trade, a place for a school, a place where, as the judge wrote it, no man shall be judged by the color of his skin or the blood of his father, and no weapon shall be drawn in anger. They signed it, all of them. Iron Shield made his mark. Thomas Carter, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen, signed his name, the judge, the pastor, and every rancher in the room. A new treaty, a new beginning. As the sun began to rise, Eliza sat, her head resting on the bed, asleep from sheer, crushing exhaustion. She awoke with a start. The room was quiet, too quiet. She looked at Tahu. His face, the burning flush of the fever was gone. His skin was cool, but he was breathing. His breath was not a rasp. It was deep. It was even. It was the breath of sleep. She grabbed his hand. It was not cold. It was warm. Tears streamed down her face. Uma, asleep in her chair, awoke. She saw. She touched his forehead. A small, weary smile touched her lips. The fever has broken. He has crossed back. He is with us. Eliza laid her head on his chest and cried, her body shaking with a relief so profound it felt like pain. He woke up hours later. The sun was high. He blinked, his eyes confused, his body a map of dull, aching pain. He saw her, her face, tear-stained, exhausted, but she was here. Eliza, he whispered. His throat was raw. I am here, she said, her voice thick. I am here, Tahu. You are safe. The battle? It is over, she said. Briggs is arrested. Jacob is dead. He closed his eyes, processing. He saved me. Yes, Eliza whispered. In the end, he saved you. And my people. They are safe, she said. She told him about the council, about the new land, the neutral ground. Your father and mine, they made a new peace, a real one, for the children. He looked at her, and he understood. He saw the truth in her eyes. His hand, weak, found hers. My sacrifice, it was not for nothing. No, she said, kissing his hand, her tears falling on his skin. It was for everything. She looked at him, this man from another world, this man who was her husband, the father of her child. I am not going back to the ranch, she said, her voice fierce. And I am not just a Comanche wife. I do not belong in either place. You and I, we are our own place. He nodded, a small, weak movement. That new land, she said, her mind seeing it clearly. The neutral ground. That is our home. We will build a house there. A house and a lodge. A place for both. A place for anyone. A place where no one is an outcast. Where no one is a half-breed. Just people. He smiled, a faint, weak curving of his lips. Good home, he whispered, and his eyes closed, this time in a true, healing sleep. Eliza stood at the window, looking out at the rising sun. It was illuminating the strip of prairie between the town and the Comanche lands. It was just empty land, dust and grass and sky. But to her, it was the future. It was the first new day. A sunrise over a patch of earth where a Comanche flag and an American flag might, one day, fly side by side. Not in conquest, but in a shared, fragile, and hard-won peace. 4 years had passed. The scar of the new railroad was etched into the prairie, a raw iron seam that stitched the territory to the fast-moving east. The world had changed. The town had grown, bustling with new saloons, a bank, and men who sold land they had never seen. The old dangers of skirmishes and raids had been replaced by the new dangers of lawyers, land agents, and barbed wire, and on the neutral ground, the strip of land that belonged to neither and to both, stood the house. It was not a ranch house, and it was not a cluster of lodges. It was both. Tahu and Thomas Carter had built the main structure, a solid, 2-story cabin of thick logs, with a wide, welcoming porch. But it was connected by a covered breezeway to a structure that was pure Comanche, a large, permanent lodge, reinforced with timber. Its hide covering stretched tight. It was a place of 2 architectures, 2 minds, sitting under one vast sky. Wagon drivers and riders had given it a name, the Midway House, or sometimes the crossroads of 2 skies. Here, Eliza and Tahu lived. The 4 years had changed them. Eliza, now 22, had lost the last of her girlhood fragility. Her face was browned by the sun, her hands capable, her eyes steady. She moved with a quiet authority. Tahu, his body scarred but his mind at peace, had become a different kind of leader. He was not a war chief. He was a mediator, a judge. The long, puckered scar on his side, a gift from Briggs's man, still ached when the weather turned cold, a constant reminder of the price of their new life. They had 2 children. The first, a boy of 3 named Kai, had his father's steady, dark eyes and his mother's unruly light brown hair. The second, a girl of 1 year, Rosa, was the reverse, with Eliza's blue eyes and a cap of straight, black hair. They were children of the crossroads, bilingual before they could walk properly, belonging completely to this new world their parents had built. Their home was not a home, it was a sanctuary. The sign on the gate, carved by Thomas Carter, said simply, "Water and shelter." It was a promise. It became a stopping point for everyone. Comanche hunting parties, on their way to the diminished herds, stopped to rest their ponies and trade for flour. Mexican families. Heading north. Stopped for repairs and medicine. Even the occasional quiet man with a fast horse and a past he did not discuss was welcome, so long as he left his gun and his trouble at the gate. Tahu's domain was the porch and the corral. His word was law on this small patch of land. One hot afternoon, a young ranch hand from a neighboring spread, a boy named Billy, got into a heated dispute with a young Comanche warrior named Stone Eater. The argument was over a stray calf, and it had escalated from words to shoves. Knives had been drawn. Tahu did not shout. He simply walked between them, a man whose presence was heavy with an authority earned in blood. "There is no fighting here," he said, his voice quiet. "He called me a thief," Billy spat, his face red. "He fenced the creek," Stone Eater countered, his hand tight on his knife. "The rule of this house is simple," Tahu said. "You have a dispute. You settle it, but not with blades." He looked at the two young men, anger rolling off them in waves. "You are both hot. You both think you are fast." He pointed to a large mesa, 2 miles distant. "Race, on foot. The loser will spend the rest of the day mending the fence for my wife and cooling down the winner's horse." The two young men stared at him. Then at the mesa, it was a ridiculous, grueling, and perfectly fair challenge. An hour later, the two returned, gasping, covered in sweat, Billy having won by a few yards, as Stone Eater, grumbling, took the winner's horse. He was laughing. The anger was gone, burned away by the prairie sun and a shared, pointless effort. Tahu taught the young men of both sides how to argue, how to use law, and, when necessary, how to use their legs instead of their fists. Eliza's domain was the house. She had taken Uma's place, in a way, as a quiet force of change. She was the one who met the wagons, who offered a bowl of stew, who tended to fevers and fears. Her sanctuary, in particular, was for women. She had a reputation that had spread by whispers from town to town, ranch to ranch. If a woman was in trouble, if she carried the bruises of a heavy hand, if she was running, she could go to the Midway house. The past had settled, as dust always does. Colonel Harlan Briggs had been court-martialed. His crimes, laid bare by Judge Miller and corroborated by other officers, had been too flagrant to ignore. He was found guilty of treason, of murder, and of inciting a war for personal profit. He had died of a fever in a military prison back east, a bitter, forgotten man. His name was now a curse, a story told to new recruits about the poison of greed and hate. Thomas Carter was a grandfather. He had aged 20 years in the force since Jacob's death. The hate that had fueled him was gone, scoured out, leaving him quiet and frail, but kind. He came to the house 3 times a week, his wagon loaded with supplies from the ranch. He would sit on the porch for hours, teaching Kai how to whittle a piece of wood, or holding Rosa on his knee, telling her stories about the stars. He was atoning, not with words, but with simple, grandfatherly love. Uma was there just as often. She was the children's grandmother, the Totsi. She and Carter would often sit on the porch together, 2 old people from worlds that had nearly destroyed each other, united by the small, laughing children who were their shared blood. She would tell Kai and Rosa the old stories of Coyote and the Eagle, ensuring that their Comanche heritage was as strong as their white. The railroad was a fact of life, its whistle a low moan in the distance. The town was changing. The old prejudices had not vanished, but they had been blunted. The story of that day at the fort had become a legend. The story of Jacob's last act, of Carter's confession, of Eliza and Tahu's ride. The people of the town had seen, with their own eyes, that violence was not a solution, only a seed for more violence. They looked at the Midway house not with suspicion, but with a kind of grudging respect. It was a place that worked, a place where peace was not a treaty, but a daily job. One evening, as a cold wind swept down from the mountains, Eliza was putting the children to bed. Tahu was in the barn, tending to a horse that had thrown a shoe. There was a frantic pounding on the thick wooden door. Eliza grabbed a heavy shawl and opened it. A girl stood on the porch, silhouetted against the dark. She was young, perhaps 17, maybe 18. Her dress was torn. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, and a dark, ugly bruise was blooming on her cheek. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand, her eyes wide with animal terror. Eliza's heart stopped. She was not looking at a stranger. She was looking at a ghost. She was looking at herself. 4 years ago. "Please," the girl whimpered, her teeth chattering. They told me in town, they said you help, Eliza stepped aside and pulled the girl into the warmth of the house. "You are safe," she said, her voice firm, the words she herself had longed to hear. "No one will hurt you here. Bolt the door. Tahu," she called out, seeing him cross the yard, his face concerned. She sat the girl by the fire, wrapping her in a thick wool blanket, and handed her a tin mug of hot broth. The girl drank it in shuddering gasps. "My name is Eliza. What is yours?" Sarah," the girl stammered. "Who did this to you? Sarah, who are you running from?" My father," Sarah whispered, fresh tears rolling down her face. He lost at cards. He lost everything, and when he had nothing left, he bet me," she sobbed, a raw, broken sound. "A man, an old gunman named Sloan. He won. He said I was his now. He said he was coming for me tonight, to marry me. My father, he held me, while Sloan, he hit me. He said I had to be taught to obey." Eliza's blood ran cold. It was the same story. A different cage, but the same bars. A girl, sold as property. "You are not property," Eliza said, her voice a low, steady fire. "You are a woman, and you will not be married to any man you do not choose." Sarah looked up, her eyes hopeless. "But where can I go, men? They are all like that. They just take. There is no good ones." Eliza sat opposite her, the firelight playing on her face. Tahu had entered and was sitting quietly in the corner, mending a bridle, his presence a silent, steady comfort. "I know what you feel," Eliza said softly. "I know that fear. You look at me now, and you see a woman with a home, a husband. You see me as strong. But when I was your age, 18, I was just like you. I was terrified." Sarah's crying quieted. Her curiosity piqued. Eliza told her, not the whole story, not the politics or the battles. She told her the heart of it. I was part of a treaty, a business deal. I was given to my husband to save my father's ranch. I had never spoken to him. He was a stranger, from other people, a man my world called a savage. She leaned in, her voice dropping. "On my wedding night, I was taken to his lodge, and I sat on the floor, and I cried. I cried just like you are crying now. I was so afraid. I thought my life was over. I thought I was just a body for him to use." Sarah looked at Tahu, who was watching his wife, his expression full of a deep, quiet love. "And," Sarah whispered, afraid of the answer. "And," Eliza said, "he did not touch me. He sat across the fire, all night. He told me that in his world, a wife was to be honored, not forced. He said he would not lay a hand on me unless I came to him." "Unless I chose him?" Sarah stared, her mouth open. He waited." "He waited," Eliza confirmed, her gaze meeting Tahu's across the room. "He was a Comanche warrior, a man everyone feared, and he was the kindest, most gentle man I had ever met. He treated me with honor when my own father treated me like livestock." Eliza reached out and took the girl's hand. "There are bad men, Sarah, many of them, like Sloan, like your father, but there are good men too. They are rare, and they are not always the ones in the fine suits. Sometimes they are the ones the world calls savages. You are safe here, and in the morning, We will find a way for you to be free. You will never have to go back to him." For the first time, a flicker of something other than terror appeared in Sarah's eyes. It was a small, fragile thing. It was hope. She looked at Tahu, the quiet, powerful man in the corner, and then at Eliza, the woman who had opened the door. She was not alone. The railroad whistle blew, a lonely sound in the dark, but inside the Midway house, the fire was warm, and for one more lost traveler. The world had been held at bay. The years had turned, 25 of them. The land had changed, and it had not. The railroad was an old scar now, a part of the landscape. The town had a bank, a telegraph office, and 3 churches. The vast, open prairie was now a checkerboard of fences, the wire pulled taut, dividing what had once been indivisible. The Midway house, the house at the crossroads of 2 skies, had grown. It was no longer just a log cabin and a lodge. It was a compound, a small village. There was a larger barn, a small schoolhouse, and a scattering of smaller cabins for travelers or those in need. The cottonwoods Eliza had planted as saplings were now tall, thick trees that offered deep, cool shade. Eliza, now in her early 40s, wore her silver-streaked hair in a single, thick braid, Comanche style. The lines on her face were deep, etched by sun and worry, but her eyes were clear and full of a quiet, unshakable authority. Tahu, his own hair a sheet of iron gray, was leaner, his face a map of his life. The scar on his side still pained him, but he moved with the same deliberate grace. A man who had nothing left to prove. He was the most respected arbitrator in the territory, his word trusted by settlers, Comanche and Kiowa alike. Their children were grown. Kai, their son, was 24, a man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's sharp, educated mind. He had been east, to a white man's college, and had returned with a law book, a tool he wielded with more skill than his father had ever wielded a lance. Rosa, their daughter, was 22, with her mother's blue eyes and her grandmother Uma's fierce spirit. She was the medicine woman of their small community, her knowledge a blend of Uma's herbs and a doctor's textbook. The house had become what they had dreamed a tradition. It was the first stop for any woman fleeing a bad marriage, any orphan fleeing a harsh world, any man, white or native, fleeing a past and looking for a chance to start fresh. The old hatreds had not vanished. They had just changed shape. The world had moved on, but it had a way of repeating its old, ugly patterns. A new conflict was brewing, a perfect echo of the one that had forged their family. A group of slick, wealthy men from the east, backed by the railroad, wanted to build a large hotel and casino on the edge of the neutral ground. It would bring money, they argued. It would also bring whiskey, gambling, and prostitution, right to the border of the Comanche lands. The reaction was immediate and predictable. A new generation of Comanche warriors, young men who had grown up in the shadow of the reservations, saw it as a new invasion, a new poison. They were led by a fiery young man named Red Hawk, the son of the warrior who had once called Tahu soft. "They bring their poison to our lands," Red Hawk had declared at a council. "Our fathers fought the blue soldiers. We must fight this new army of vice. We will burn their buildings. We will keep our land clean." The tension was exactly the same. Greed on one side, violence on the other. Eliza and Tahu watched from the porch of the Midway house. They were older now, and it was not their place to lead the charge. "He sounds just like Red Fox," Eliza said quietly, watching the angry young men ride out from the Comanche camp. All fire and no thought. "He is young," Tahu said, his hand resting on her shoulder. "He has not seen what we have seen. He does not know the price of fire." That afternoon, the confrontation happened. The surveyors for the casino, a half-dozen armed men, arrived to drive their stakes. Red Hawk and his warriors, their faces painted, rode up to meet them. But before a shot could be fired, or a bow drawn, a new group rode onto the field. It was Kai, their son. He was not wearing buckskin. He was wearing a simple linen shirt and a coat. He was not carrying a rifle. He was carrying a worn leather book. Eliza and Tahu stood on the porch, watching. Their hearts were in their throats. "This is not your land to survey," Kai said, his voice calm, clear, and carrying in the tense air. He spoke in English. "We have a charter from the railroad," the lead surveyor, a hard-faced man, said, his hand on his pistol. "The railroad does not own this land." Kai replied, "This is neutral ground, protected by the Treaty of 1875, a treaty signed by Judge Miller, by the United States Army, and by Chief Iron Shield." He opened the book. "I have a copy of it here. It states that this land is to be held in trust for the purpose of peaceful trade and community. A casino is not peaceful trade. It is a violation. You are trespassing." The surveyor stared. He was used to dealing with savages. He was not used to dealing with a man, brown-skinned, who quoted treaties and spoke like a lawyer. That is an old piece of paper," the surveyor stammered. "It is a legal document," Kai said, "and if you place one stake, I will have the federal marshal in town arrest you for trespassing. And if you draw that pistol," he added, his voice dropping to his father's quiet, cold register, "my friends and I will have to defend ourselves, and the law will be on our side." From the other side, Red Hawk shouted in Comanche, "Talk is for women. Kai, let us burn these men. Let us drive them out." Kai turned his horse, his back to the white men, and faced Red Hawk. He spoke in Comanche, his voice just as firm. "And what then? Red Hawk, you burn them. They return with soldiers, not a coward like Briggs, but a real army. They will say we broke the treaty you are trying to protect. They will take this land. They will take all the land. Your fire will burn your own house down." He looked at the two armed, angry groups. "My father, he bled on this ground to make this peace. My uncle died on this ground. We will not honor them by spilling more blood. We will honor them by being smarter than the men who came before." He turned back to the surveyor. "Go back to town. Tell your bosses to read the treaty. Tell them my name is Kai Carter Tahu, and I'm a member of the territorial bar. They will understand." The surveyor, his face red with frustration, looked at the calm, educated man. He looked at the angry warriors. He looked at the law book, cursing. He motioned for his men, and they turned their horses and rode away. Red Hawk, his men lowering their bows, looked at Kai with a new, confused respect. The fight was over, and not a drop of blood had been spilled. On the porch, Eliza let out a breath she did not know she was holding. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Tahu put his arm around her, his own eyes bright. They had done it. They had passed it on. The battle was no longer theirs to fight. That evening, as the sun began to bleed into the horizon, staining the sky the color of a bruised peach, Tahu brought their horses. "Where are we going?" Eliza asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "For a ride," he said. "The children can watch the house." They rode out onto the prairie, away from the house, away from the fences, to a high ridge that overlooked the valley. It was the same ridge where she had sat, an 18-year-old girl, desperate to outrun her own life. They sat on their horses, side by side, watching the world turn to purple. "He was good today," Tahu said, his voice thick with pride. "He was you," Eliza said, smiling through her tears. "He was you, with my words." "He is himself," Tahu said. "That is better." They were quiet for a long time, listening to the evening sounds, the call of a lone hawk. "Do you remember?" Eliza said softly. "That first night in the lodge?" Tahu nodded. "I remember the smell of the fire, and your dress, it was very white." "I was so afraid," she whispered. "I sat on the floor, and I cried. I thought my life was over. I thought that marriage, it was going to be my grave, that I was just a thing for you to use." Tahu turned in his saddle to look at her strong, beautiful, lined face. "And he said, his voice a low rumble. "I thought I was being shackled. I thought marrying you was the white man's way of killing me, the slow death of my freedom. I thought I was trading my life for a piece of paper." He reached out and took her hand. his calloused palm fitting against hers. A perfect match. I was wrong. I was a warrior. I thought freedom was the open prairie, the fast horse, the wind. I did not know. True freedom. Eliza. It was choosing to stay. It was choosing you, every sunrise, just as I promised. You were not my chain. You were my anchor. They stayed out on the prairie that night. They made a small camp, under the stars, just as they had done on that first terrible night after the battle. They slept wrapped in a single blanket, the bodies of two old people who knew each other better than they knew themselves. Eliza woke first, as she always did. The sky was the color of a faint pearl, the very edge of dawn. Tahu was beside her, his breathing deep and steady. She looked at him, at the silver in his hair, at the deep peace on his face, and she cried. Not for fear, not for loss. She cried for the sheer, overwhelming fullness of her life. She remembered the girl who had cried in the teepee, her life a cold, empty void. And she looked at the man who had filled it. A night of tears, she whispered to herself, can be the start of a whole new life. She was sitting on the porch swing a week later, her granddaughter, Kai's 5-year-old daughter, in her lap. The girl, named Uma, was playing with the old feathered necklace that Eliza still wore. Why do you cry? Totsi, the girl asked. Kai says you cry at the sunrise. Eliza smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. Because, my love, I am happy. I am remembering. Remembering what? That true love does not erase who you are. It does not make a Comanche into a white man, or a white woman into a Comanche. She looked at her granddaughter. This perfect child of 3 bloodlines. It just makes a bigger space. It teaches you how to live with the differences, how to build a house big enough for all of it. She looked out over the Midway house. It was a beautiful, chaotic, living thing. The log cabin, the lodge, the schoolhouse, the barn. On a long clothesline, a white linen sheet flapped in the wind, next to a brightly beaded buckskin shirt, next to a Mexican cotton blouse, a tapestry of all of them. Her gaze fell on the porch floor, on a spot near the door. It was a faint, faded stain, a circle in the wood, lighter than the rest. It was the spot where Sarah, the girl who had fled the gambler, had sat and cried. It was the spot where a dozen other women had sat, their lives in pieces. It was, she knew, the same spot where she herself would have sat and cried, that first night, if she had had a porch to cry on. It was a mark, the holy, lasting mark of the tears that had started it all. The sun was high, the day was beginning. In the distance, on the road from town, a new wagon was approaching. It was moving slowly. It looked tired. Eliza stood up, putting her granddaughter down. She smoothed her apron. Tahu came out of the house, holding a cup of coffee for her. He saw the wagon, and he nodded. The story was over, but the work was never over. There was always someone new on the road, someone lost, someone knocking, and there was always someone here to open the door. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would be honored if you let us know where in the world you are listening from in the comments. We love hearing from you and sharing our thoughts. Please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and like this video. If you enjoyed the story, please support us by hitting that hype button, so this tale can be heard by even more folks.